single story. It's kind of there's a little bit of a two-story in the back of the home. So next. Location is likely you know exactly where that is. I think what's unique about the property is to the west, there's the open space, fabulous, public or amenity there. Next. The addition would be 2 stories on the rear of the home. So it's shown there. The first floor on the left is extending the master suite to make it a little bit larger than the current master suite. The second floor is a learning center. I'll tell you more about that as we click through the presentation. Next. So that is the rear of the home. The footprint of the rear addition is there indicated in the dotted area. And next. The 2-story addition is to the right. There's a courtyard in the center. There's some fabulous trees, including the one in the center of the courtyard. That is extremely important to the homeowners. And next. And the coolest thing about this project, I think, is the spirit of what wants to be accomplished there. It's a learning center for their 17 grandchildren. So most of them are in Lake Bluff, walkable. So this is extremely important to the customer, and this is really what's driving the addition project. This will be on the second floor. And next. And as Clara noted, the request is a 3.5 or almost 3.5 foot encroachment into the front yard setback, and so 26.55 feet versus the 30 feet. Next. And what is unique about this, as I mentioned, to the west or left on the slide, apparently there was a housing originally proposed, which didn't happen. Because of that housing, they would have extended a number of the east-west street, including Hawthorne, which never got extended, and likely will never get extended. So that brings us to the next slide, which here's a shot to, if that street went through, that's what that would look like. So to the right is the 300 McLaren property. To the left is the neighbor. Closest neighbor is 150 feet from where that encroachment might be. And next. And, it kind of begs the question of what the front or the side yard is. The face of the house, the address is on McLaren. The long face of the house is facing to the east. But because of how the zoning code is written, the interpretation is this is the side of the house is really considered the front of the house. So if it was a front yard, well, it is a front yard as the zoning code says. That would be a 30-foot setback. If it was an interior side yard, it'd be 16 feet. So we're kind of looking at that. And then next. And this is really kind of, the details of that. That's at 26.55 feet. There's really no one close. 150 feet is the closest area. It's heavily wooded, and that's really the request. Now, if you looked at that to say, well, why couldn't you move it a little further, let's say up on the slide? But the key thing is that tree. We're trying to stay as much as we can away from this tree. There was a previous addition done on the other side, that other bump on the top left. They kept a certain distance away from the tree. It did survive, and we're hoping to be very, very careful about that tree, including root pruning and having the tree experts come out, the arborists come out. It would be a shame to lose that tree. So that's why we're just pushing it over about 3.5 feet. Love to go further, but again, we want to be very reasonable. So that's really why we're here this evening, and hopefully you'll see it our way. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Maybe if you could, John, just briefly go through the standards of variations.
Okay. You know what? I'm going to need some help on that, Clara, because I don't have that detail here.
Or what we could do, we can just
or
incorporate
ask.
and adopt and incorporate by reference, I guess, will be fine. Yeah, thank you.
And you know what? There's one other thing here. You did click that. That was the top secret slide. So what we learned about 24 hours ago there's two lots here. There's one to the left, there's one to the right. The lot on the left, apparently there were some covenants related to the lot on the left. There's a 12% max coverage for that lot. As we had proposed with that deck, we were a little over 12%. It was more like 14 and a half, almost 15%. So we, has talked to the homeowner, and we will, if we're successful in getting this variance approved, we won't change that setback request at all. We'll just deal with making the deck a little smaller and, kind of coming up with a solution around that.
So you'll stay within the 12%?
We'll stay within the 12%. So whoever brought that up, thank you very much, because sometimes a constraint makes the design better, and that's exactly what happened here.
Okay, no, thank you for that clarity. Anything else, John, or just
No, I think
open to
that's
questions?
it. We just, we'd love for your consideration and
Great.
to approve the request.
Who'd like to start?
I just have a question for clarity. In this particular drawing here,
Yes.
There's the small bump out on the bottom right of
Yes.
the addition. What's the purpose of that bump out?
If,
Because that does increase
It's a little bit, it comes out another foot. It's for the bathroom. The tub is there, so to get kind of two sides of light in that tub
So
area.
that is needed for that space.
Interior-wise, it'd be nicer. And it also, the other thing it does very nicely, it breaks up the facade a little bit. It's only a one-story piece to that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Toll. Member Russell?
Don't have any questions, just two comments.
sir.
If you really do intend to save that tree, and it's a really nice tree, I personally would not have any problem at all with the addition sliding a couple more feet further south, number one.
Very nice, thank you.
You'd have to ask for approval tonight,
Yes.
because we're approving
Yes,
what you present. And then the other thing is, that looked like a pretty beautiful design, and I would recommend that you go to the village board and ask them to change the covenant.
yes.
There's many similar lots along there that I believe don't have the type of restrictions that is imposed on your lot. And I think it had to do with
Okay.
the timing. This owner may have been first. All of
Okay.
those restrictions were put on there back when the Skokie Preserve was first developed. And believe it or not, most of the homeowners were frightened to death of the Skokie Preserve. And they wanted extra buffer between the preserve and their homes. So
Wow.
they traded and purchased and somehow all got an extra lot between their home and the Skokie Preserve property. But if my memory is correct, I would encourage you to go to the village board
Yeah.
and ask for a relief. But that's
Thank you.
your choice.
Thank you. Clara, if you could go
Because
back
taking
a
away,
few
you're going to eliminate
to-
half your deck.
to the picture, to that picture with the tree. The tree's awesome. If it's just that magical tree that's, it's usually the architect's rendering is overzealous in terms of the size, but it's about that big or larger. It's really awesome. So thank you very much.
What kind of tree is it?
Pardon me?
What's the?
I wish I knew, sir. I don't know. Doug, do you know?
The tree's been planted.
Doug's the homeowner.
The original owner, and I think it dates back to like the 1960s. And again, every year it gets more magnificent. We've had to sort of cut around the tree because it grows, but obviously it's a focal point. And I wanted to first thank John for his presentation, and thank you for entertaining it. I think John mentioned that Diane and I have 17 grandchildren. And some of the, most of the grandchildren actually live within walking distance. And our dream is to make sure that we have a study center for them. You can well imagine, competing for time with your mother and father with 5 other siblings. So this is going to be sort of the recluse where they can come. And Diane's got a, teaching degree. I went to college twice, so hopefully we can get some value.
You don't know what kind of tree that is?
I wish I could tell you. I don't know the genus.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know what we'll do is by the end of the day tomorrow, we'll let Clara know and she could pass out that information.
Not that important. I was just a curiosity.
I'm just curious, has an arborist looked at the tree yet?
Not
just to
yet.
see? Okay. so
Not yet.
we
We'll
don't
have
know
them there
whether it's-
for the root pruning and, hopefully, I think there's some procedures that happen.
So George, you are suggesting to approve additional relief over what's requested,
If they would ask for
If
it
they
to
would
help
ask for
give the chance of the tree surviving,
right?
because they're going to disturb the tree roots closer than that building wall,
Absolutely.
building it.
So are you prepared to ask for
Yes,
a number
yes.
that would,
Yes.
Before you do that, I would talk to an arborist and get their opinion as to how far you have to move away from the tree to secure it
Okay.
before you go through the trouble of changing.
Could we perhaps say up to a number? Would you guys feel comfortable with 10 feet? Which would still be within the side yard setback if it was in fact the interpretation that this was a side yard.
So,
I don't think we'll need the whole 10 feet, but if you could do that, and we would greatly appreciate that.
so one question is, in terms of the public notice that was sent out, did it include the distance into the setback?
It did not include the distance into the setback, and it had, and anything else.
Okay. So, typically speaking, once notices go out, to increase the relief is not the best approach. A neighbor who may have looked at the packet, got the notice, looked at the packet and said, oh, I'm okay with, a couple of feet, and if all of a sudden it's more, may have objections. So the safest thing to do is, if that is the request, would be to continue it, renotice it. Ultimately, it is the risk is really the applicant's. So if they want to proceed with that request and you don't want to make them renotice, we can move ahead, but it would be at their risk if a neighbor wanted to file a challenge and say, had I known, I would have shown up, and this is a procedural due process problem. But
I would feel more comfortable with renoticing, because I did think about that after we had this quick discussion, is if a neighbor did look at the packet and see the request.
0.4 feet.
Yeah, because this is a very minor request, but, giving 10 feet would be less minor, for sure.
Yeah. How about this? We go with the 3.5 feet. After we talk to the arborist and get their opinion, maybe we'll come back. But we would like to get the approval so we can kind of march forward on, submitting for building permits, et cetera.
So you're saying that
We'll
if it's
stick
more
with
than the,
we'll stick with
come back.
what we've requested.
okay.
And then if the arborist says, boy, if you could go another 5 feet, that tree's gonna make it, then we'll come back.
What happens if they say, forget it, it's not going to happen? I mean, the arborist says, no matter what you do, it's going to kill the tree.
You know what? Then we'll get a second opinion, because I know it can be done.
Okay, fair enough. I have no problems with your proposal. I think it's a great idea and good for the grandkids. Whatever's good for the grandkids is good. My only concern is we're setting a precedent going into a side yard that we've already discussed previously at a previous meeting, where we objected to going into a side yard in the same block. So where does this leave us when the previous applicant comes back and wants to put the same structure on their side yard?
I think we look at the merits of each case individually and the facts of each case individually.
But we'll have precedent.
So from a legal perspective, granting a variation it doesn't set precedent. It's not in the sense of somebody can say, well, you did it here, therefore you're obligated to give it to me. It becomes, call it a political or optical issue if somebody wants to raise it. But I think the chair is correct that the merits of each application, every house is slightly different. The hardship when you're dealing with a variation, and the factors may be slightly different, addition to addition on various houses and various lots. So there's no hard and fast rule that if you allow it in the side yard here, you have to allow another addition in a side yard. They will have to meet their own independent, the standards, once again, for that other lot.
Okay.
So if you were thinking, John, about moving to the south, I guess, 3, 4, 5 feet, you'd shift the whole box that 3 or 4 or 5 feet, or would you?
Yeah, well, certainly, because then, the key would be to move the building, the proposed building, as far away from the tree as possible.
Okay. And I guess you just have to have buy-in, obviously, from the owner to make sure that they're comfortable with that
Yeah,
shift,
well,
so
we
to
would,
speak.
we would certainly, go through the details with
Right.
them. We've spent a lot of time on the interior of this, and they're very happy with what we have, and if we slid it over, I suspect that, I know the plan would work just as well, if not better.
Oh, good. Any further discussion from the commissioners?
No?
All right. Any further comments, Mr. Schuster? Or?
Nope.
All right. Is there a motion, please?
Make a motion that we approve the current plan as is, and should the applicant decide to move the box further south, they need to come back to discuss that with us.
Actually, one comment on the motion and suggestion. So in terms of the plans, it was indicated that the deck is going to be slightly smaller. So what you may want to do is say, subject to the submission of updated plans to reflect that are approved by the village administrator.
Exactly.
Well said, Elliot.
What you said.
Okay.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
The only one thing I want to raise with that is there was discussion that if they wanted to keep the large deck, then they would just need to get the approval of the village board or the amendment to that too. So you may want to,
So,
Okay, hold on.
well, so
Conditional
this is a
upon.
question, I guess, for the applicant. If the applicant wants to reserve the right to consider and ask the village board to modify the covenant to allow the larger deck, that could be built into the approval this evening. That if it's subject to the current plans, then, they would be contingent upon an amendment to the covenant. And if they desire to make the deck smaller, then they would need to submit updated plans showing that to be approved by the village administrator.
But it doesn't have to come here then.
It wouldn't have to come back, but that's up to the applicant if they want to reserve that right.
But do we need to make our approval of the relief requested conditional on that?
the only reason you may want to do that is you wouldn't necessarily want to approve something that isn't in line with the covenant, so that they could move forward with that, but not need it in the covenants.
Understood, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess where we sit, I guess, is the applicant, I'll ask the applicant, do you want to have this, the PCZBA give you the option of keeping the deck larger?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but not slow the process down.
Okay.
Because the goal is to, as quickly as we can get in for building permits after the zoning, relief has been approved. And we wouldn't want that to slow us down.
That's fine.
Okay, so
To give us the flexibility, that would be great, really,
So-
very appreciated.
you want to modify?
Whatever you
Yeah,
say.
okay. So your motion is to approve the relief, subject to number one, that if the deck remains the same size as proposed, that it would be contingent upon an amendment to the covenant. And two, if the applicant desires to shrink the deck, that they provide updated plans to the village to be approved by the village administrator, if they choose to do that.
Okay. And then the third thing would be if you decide to increase the size of the encroachment, you would need to come back.
Okay, that's fine.
I think-
But one question, the approval of the village administrator, is that a meeting with them? Is it a process where there's a public notice required?
No, it'd be,
Administrative process.
Administrator,
Okay.
just submission.
Gotcha.
By
Okay.
email. And in terms of if they want to increase if they want to increase the the encroachment, they would have to reapply for a variation. So we don't need that as part of the condition.
Okay.
So it would just be the two.
Okay.
So that's your modified motion? Want a new second?
Is there a second?
I'll second as amended.
Okay.
All right. Any further discussion? And John, crystal clear to you.
Yes, sir.
All right.
And this has been awesome. I've been through so many of these things. Thank you, sir, for suggesting more, a greater, or less of a setback. That's the first time ever. So thank
The
you.
first time George ever did that.
Thank you.
It is a unique situation.
Yeah. So I'm going to take another minute. So I'm very proud of a particular project that we did in the area, and that was School Street in Libertyville. You familiar with that at all? So we are very happy that we were involved in that project, and this will be a good one here. So thank you so much.
Well, not quite official yet.
Oh, you got to vote? Okay. Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
Any further discussion?
Go around.
All right. Could we have a vote, please?
Yep. Member Fisher?
Yes.
Member Miller?
Yes.
Member Russell?
Yes.
Member Sorensen?
Yes.
Member Toll?
Aye.
And Chair Peters?
Aye.
Official?
Now it's official. Next steps, Clara.
Well, the next, this is the approval body, so you would be able to move through the building permit process.
Yeah.
So the draft that's in your packet, we will work with Clara to update it to reflect those conditions and
Yes, correct.
get signed and, yeah. we'll be done.
Thank you so much. Have a good
This
evening.
doesn't have to go before the board then?
Does not because it's 11.5%
Gotcha.
variation
Yeah, it would-
under that 25%.
Yeah, it would only go before the board for the request for an amendment to the covenant if that's so desired.
Correct.
Which the
Or-
variation would be granted, it would just be purely an approval and amendment to the covenant.
That, or if they were to increase it by, say, 10 feet, that would increase the degree, of non-conform, or of the degree of variation above that 25% threshold.
All right.
I think he wants to take 200 square feet out of the deck.
Thank you for that. I feel like a puppet.
I just, a ventriloquist.
Ventriloquist, yeah.
I don't think a tree's gonna make it anyway.
Okay. Agenda item number 6, Ms. Gable, if you could introduce that, please.
I can, except that our consultant is conversing over there, but that's okay.
All right. We'll take a little break. I'm sure Michael's ready to roll.
Get them out of here.
Got all night.
All night?
Okay, well, I will get the,
Yeah, Michael reined in.
I'll get the comp plan stuff ready to share, so. All right. The village's consultant, Tesca and Associates, will provide a presentation on the draft comprehensive land use plan. And for tonight, the discussion will focus on remaining key policies, recommendations, and focus areas that still need a consensus. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Michael Blue.
Good evening, all. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Good evening, Michael.
Everybody should practice talking, and we're here to listen to you again tonight. So, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, no matter how cold it is outside. We're very pleased to present to you the first draft of the Lake Bluff Comprehensive Plan, which we all have been doing together for about 20 months now. Couple of other thank yous first. First, thank you to Clara and Drew and the whole staff here, everybody who's had a hand in this. It's become very Lake Bluff centric, like very few plans do, because everybody's been so involved. Thank you to you all for making that happen too. This has been a terrific process as far as we're concerned. I also want to thank Andrew Dunham from our office, who I think is online. Is he there?
He is.
Okay. He's going to answer the hard questions. Aside from preparing the document that you're looking at, Andrew took on what I describe as the highest degree of difficulty effort in city planning, which is he did the first draft. And so his thoughts and absorption of everything that we learned through the process, everything we developed in our office, everything we worked through with staff is in this document. And so I want to thank him for that. Couple of words of introduction before we go through. We are still, excuse me. We are still working our way through a draft document, right? So nothing is final. We have not gone to public hearing. We're not ready for public hearing. We'll talk about next steps towards the end of the presentation. This document is built on the public engagement, our land use analysis, all the work with staff that I talked about, and all the feedback that you provided in terms of the goals and objectives, all those directions. Oh, bless you. Think all the way back to when we started talking about those fundamental planning goals that we built from the previous plan. All that's in here. We don't set any of that aside. That's all very forward here. In fact, in working with staff, we kind of came up with this idea of, we're not just going to put them in here, but we're going to key them, and we're going to show which of the recommendations follow from those, so that people who read the document, use the document, as you as the village use the document, you can kind of track why and where these things are in here. So that's something about the plan that I personally think is really useful for a community. I'm sorry, I'm getting over the thing that's going around. No actions automatically happen as part of adopting the plan, right, Ben? Ben will tell you that that's the true case, right? So there are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of recommendations. There are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of recommendations that are in the document, things that are suggested to do and so on and so forth. None of those happen automatically. Nothing changes the budget, nothing directs you as a commission, nothing directs anybody. This is the list of things that, put together as a whole, the actions taken at the right time, under the right circumstances, build towards the vision of the community. So there's a lot of great graphics, a lot of great information in here in terms of redevelopment and redesign and so on. No zoning changes, no developer has any rights, nothing changes as part of the plan. It becomes a statement of village policy for you all to consider when faced with a development and when the board is faced with a budget, but nothing changes. I just want to make that clear to anybody who's listening. Given that the community is primarily built out, there's a lot of emphasis in the plan, as you've seen, on the sub-areas, on the geographies that still have potential for development or that might be opportunities to change things otherwise. And we're going to spend time with that. We're going to start with those tonight. And work our way through there. And then we'll also talk about some of those other themes that are part of the plan. And last but not least, what we wanted to focus on tonight were these broader policies. And as we go through here, there are a number of policy questions that are still worth refining and that we talk through with staff that we'd like to think through with you. If you've had the time to go through it and go through it carefully and you've got text questions or found a typo, I found 2 today going through it. I'm sorry, I hate that. Please pass those on to Clara. We will get to that, but we wanted to use our time tonight to talk about the larger policy questions that we're dealing with so that we can refine this draft, give you the ability to spend some more time with it. We know that the land use map is also something that you've got and are spending time with. So we know there's review yet to come, but tonight is more of a policy evaluation question. So that's where we're at. Andrew's here. Thank you, Andrew. Any questions before we dive in?
You know me, I've always got a comment.
I know, I always appreciate them, George.
The first 17 pages, where you've sort of summarized the plan document, are those 17 pages prepared just for us, or are you intending to use those in future presentations to the community?
This is the draft of the plan document, so it's not just for you for tonight. This is...
No, the first 17 pages ahead of what you're calling the actual plan.
Oh, is it the presentation?
The presentation boards.
Oh, I'm sorry. The presentation that we're going to go through tonight, I'll take that back then, is not part of the actual plan document, right? But when we get to where we're going to do an open house to talk to the community, we'll have some version of this that the community will be able to work from.
The draft.
I'm sorry. When we go for a public hearing, do you intend to preserve these first 17 pages before the draft plan document?
That's the presentation, right?
It's this.
Okay, that's this presentation tonight. That's not part of the plan. It summarizes what's in the plan.
Okay.
But it's not part of the actual plan document.
Good. because I'm actually more unhappy with the summary than I am with the plan. The
I'm glad you're less unhappy about the
The
plan.
attempt to summarize, like, the three primary recommendations of the whole plan, the attempt to do that is,
Right, those are just prompts for our discussion tonight.
okay.
Yeah, I would echo George's concerns also, because some of those pages caught my eye when I was working my way through it too, so I guess we're ready to proceed, Michael.
I'm sorry for that confusion.
No, it's all good.
All right, so let's start working our way through. And again, this presentation tonight is just that, and the prompts that are in here are for us to summarize very briefly these sub-areas and sections for you, and then to raise a couple of specific questions. But this slide here just kind of summarizes what I already said by way of introduction. If we go to the next slide, the first topic of any good plan is, of course, land use, generally and specific to some areas. As I mentioned, you all have the future land use plan. The future land use plan in a primarily built-out community will look an awful lot like the existing land use plan. There can be a couple of different changes, a couple of differences in it, which identifies opportunities for those kind of changes to happen. So this area, this section of the plan does not have a whole lot of detail. There was one question, though, as we talked through it collectively, was the manor house at Armour Estates. And it's an office now, and it's a relatively unique use in town. And can I use your phrase? It's sort of the Goldilocks. You didn't call it this, I do. It's sort of the Goldilocks use, right? It sits there quietly. It's part of the community. It's part of the neighborhood. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be there forever. As the plan sits now, it's sort of silent on what a future use should be. In fact, I would suggest to you that a lot of these things that we're going to go through, a lot of the questions we have for you, are areas where the plan doesn't seek to be specific. The plan speaks to potential impacts and how those should be considered if something changes. And we'll talk about that more in the sub areas. But right now, the plan just sort of speaks to the office building being there. But we wondered if maybe there were some specific ideas that you all felt it was important that the plan either introduce or suggest. And there's notes in there about low-intensity development that would replace it, or perhaps a hospitality use, those kinds of things, very generally. And we were wondering, first of all, if that's appropriate approach to take with the plan, and also if you had any other questions about this section.
I was personally troubled by that topic, so to speak. I don't know whether or not the Terlatos have been broached with respect to this sort of inclusion in a draft document. I don't know whether the homeowners association has been addressed or aware of this. I mean, obviously, it's a beautiful structure. It's got excellent appropriate utilization now. But to think about what could happen or what may happen, I'm a little bit troubled by that at this preliminary stage.
Okay.
In other words, it caught too much attention. I think it ought to be, like you probably had on some of the maps, a reference to it being there as office space, because I'm not sure most of the village is even aware of that.
So if we're going to go beyond just referencing that it's there, if we're going to talk about what it ought to be, we ought to talk to the people that are involved with it before
I
we do
would
that.
think that would be a good place to start personally.
I hear that. Okay. Other thoughts?
Gary, 99.99% of the time, I think I fall with your line of thinking, but in this case, I know my notes were, number one, that I'd want the building to be preserved. But in thinking it through, if Terlato said we're moving out of the building, if the building stayed right where it was and it was split up into 5 or 6 condos, units, whatever could fit in there, I personally wouldn't have a problem with that in terms of putting it in as a possible future use in the plan, that it could either be office or it could be condos, provided that, but the plan should make it a clear goal that the building should be preserved and not expanded upon la-di-da-di-da, swimming pools. Anyway, that was my thought to your question there.
Yeah, I think maybe, George, it's a scenario where we have to discuss it tactfully address it from a verbiage perspective. I'm not sure. But the reference, say, to a hospitality scenario would be devastating to the neighborhood.
We've been through this with the polo
Yeah, we
fields.
just got through it a couple months ago, so.
That didn't go over very well.
Anyway, I think there has to be some level of sensitivity with respect to some of these parcels, so to speak.
So would it be reasonable, not that this is going to happen, but at some point in the future, send out a survey to Tangley Oaks and say,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think got to be in play.
Don't get too close, but you,
But I think what you guys are saying is enough direction
Yeah.
for the plan. We're looking for some clarity or some vision for it. And to the extent, to exactly what you're talking about, Chair Peters, is saying that if by some reason the use would disappear, as it is, as we know it today, and I think he actually started off as an encyclopedia business, didn't it? I mean, that was what it was originally. So there's been other uses there, they were office-like, but that all you need to say is that if there are future uses, that it should be similarly in terms of intensity, low traffic demands, all the things like it is today. George is saying to include maybe even residential, low intensity, something just that says that in terms of intensity of use, it should match how it is today. And that any sort of process would involve the neighbors and I think that's all it needs to say. And that's enough, probably. I mean, legal counsel would say the more specific, the better. but those are the exact types of putting it, getting it closer and closer to what that may look like future use-wise. But I think that's excellent, all those comments.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Andrew from Tuska has his hand raised virtually.
yeah,
so.
sure, let him talk.
Yeah, thank you, Clara, and hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I just wanted to give a little context on why we discussed that, and this was the result of talking with Drew and Clara. We've worked on a lot of plans in towns that are office park heavy, and they've had issues with vacancies there. And I think definitely in the plan, our hope is that, and I don't think they don't have plans to leave, but our hope is that that remains an office use. And we just want to have a contingency plan because COVID completely shook up the office world. So we just want to make sure if it gets to a point where office is not feasible at this location, that we have some sort of backup, but we can I appreciate all your feedback, and we can absolutely lighten the tone to make it seem less like we want that use out, which is far from the truth. We think it's a lovely use and fits really well in the neighborhood.
I feel like
Thank
I
you.
have to raise my hand now, too. I did hear, though, that the idea of hospitality is something that should be struck from what's in there, right? We shouldn't be talking about that as a potential use?
Not from my perspective.
Yeah, that's what I thought I heard. I'm sorry.
no, I agree. Hospitality in the residential areas,
Yeah.
terrible idea.
I think when it was discussed, it was more of like a bread and.
Like a B&B kind of thing,
B&B.
yeah.
Still, you don't want that in a residential.
Yeah, no, we weren't talking about a boutique hotel thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and I think, the thing that came in mind was Stonebridge. The fact that Harrison House was sort of similar to, being right in the middle of an area. Here, the area is already developed and, but I think the other thing is that we're looking at maybe 20 years out. So trying to be more clear or more defined, I don't think is a great idea. I think just what you kind of narrowed it down to, low impact and, I guess some future direction potential, but not scaring everybody into thinking that's coming.
Yeah, and the big distinction between Stonebridge and this is that Stonebridge had access off of Green Bay. This is buried and surrounded by a
Existing neighborhood, yeah.
So a small density sort of housing would work, but trying to bring in people on a regular basis on a
coming and
commercial
going
level
and-
is, I don't think, appropriate.
And that's just the kind of conversations that we had hoped to have tonight. That's the kind of clarification that we're looking for.
Because I'm not even sure if the association's even aware of this being a potential
They
topic.
even have a say in it, honestly, right?
Yeah, I don't know that either, Drew. Yeah.
Good point. Right, yeah.
Okay. Was there anything else about the land use section?
I would just like those second two bullet points to go away. I don't think they're the primary recommendations of this entire effort at all. And That's why I was asking that if this slide is just being shown to us.
This slide is just being shown to you.
That's good.
No, when we get to the next level and we've landed on comfort with the recommendations that are in here, those will be what are the heart and soul of the presentation of the community, right? So the things that are in there as recommendations, that's what we'll focus on, not these statements. These, again, were summaries for those of us who know the process and the plan. So point taken, and I agree completely.
Good.
So we're going to jump now to the more detailed questions of land use on the next slide and start talking about the sub areas. So a couple caveats about sub areas in general is that these are not redevelopment plans. So to some extent, we want you to put on a different PCZBA hat, right? We're not standing before you here between us and staff as the presenters of a development proposal. But, and I've probably said this to you more times than you want to hear, when somebody who owns some of these properties wants to sell it, or somebody who's interested in buying some of these properties wants to know what they can do, they call the staff and they say, what does the village want to see here? What are y'all generally thinking about? And the purpose of the plan, the purpose of these sections that we're diving into now are to answer those questions. Oh, they're thinking of residential here. So if I'm a commercial developer, I may not bother, or I have a different tone when I come to meet with Clara. So that's what these answer. What does the village want to see here? And so at that policy level, that's what we want these things to convey. That's what the recommendations do. The recommendations that are in here and the descriptions below them also talk very much in terms of the results and the outcomes generally. What should we be cautious about? Make sure there are trails involved in these residential areas. Make sure that the residential is of this general character. We've stayed away, and sometimes we have this as a question for you. We've stayed away from saying, in the future, this should be R2. In the future, this should be 4 units per acre. Now, plans can have that level of detail in them. It's not out of bounds completely. But given the development that you've all had the opportunity to address in some of these larger areas, the actual density, to put it in the plan, we found a little bit tying your hands as a commission and as a community. That's why, again, as you read through, you'll see as much or more about the type of development generally and the amenities and the connections and trails that need to be part of the developments. So again, don't put on your I'm reviewing a development plan hat here, but think in terms of the bigger picture, what the plan is explaining to potential developers or property owners. What does the village want to see here, and are we generally in the right area? Because all of the details of the development will come before you as a development proposal.
Michael, if I may ask just a general question, when you're looking at a relatively large parcel, say the one on, not Stonebridge, but the other one on North Green Bay, I mean, there is a possibility that somebody might want to maintain it as green space. Or is that a remote possibility?
No, it's absolutely a possibility. When I was in Highland Park, 405 Sheridan Road, the Berger Estate was 17 acres on the lake. And we had a proposal from somebody who wanted to do 17 units on it. And we all went, no, and it ended up being bought by a single owner. And it's still there today. So that's absolutely a possibility.
I guess from my personal perspective, I'm just a little bit troubled if we're looking at each parcel as potentially developable or almost assuredly going to be developed. And I'm not sure that that necessarily meshes really with the village's long-term goal. I mean, I think we like our green space. And I think a lot of these parcels, if somebody was able to purchase and preserve, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
But if you look at this page, Route 41,
Yeah, that's,
I mean, this is commercial.
no, different issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is,
but I'm just,
I think that's an excellent point. And to the extent that the plan should say that, is that the village sees a very appropriate and positive future for this remaining an estate. However, if somebody came to the village, right, and is that a tone we can take?
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, I think that's a reasonable tone. And like Elliot said, the parcel we're looking at on this particular page, totally different.
Well, and I fully appreciate the emphasis on maintaining, improving buffers, green spaces, improving the streetscape. It's a continuity through to the rest of the village and the things that we value. And so regardless of what may or may not be developed there, it begins to weave things together in a better way than we have right now.
But, and trails and design, that's kind of folded into the plan.
Exactly.
Thank you, I'm glad you noticed that.
That-
So one of the questions that we had in the plan about the Route 41 corridor, had to do with the mobile home park and the question of, well, if this was annexed or if this became part of the village, is that something that we're interested in? Is this something we want to address in the plan? Is this something that's going to be here for another 20 years anyway? Are there things that have come up that you have seen, talked about, would like to set as a precedent? Not a precedent, that was the last case. Set as a policy for this in terms of if the village is approached, should there be a position, or is it something that's either so far down the road or something that would be considered based on the conditions at the time that it would be dealt with later? That was our primary 41 corridor question for you in this sub-area. No, please.
A little more context
Yeah.
to that is, the village has not received any sort of proposal to redevelop this particular site, the mobile home park. I would speculate that this is a very lucrative development, and I would not see it changing in the foreseeable future, just for future reference.
It's not part of Lake Bluff.
It is unincorporated, so it's part of our school district, park district, but it's not part of the village, yeah. But I don't know that it would change. And frankly, I would speculate, not that they've asked, that if they could expand it, they would love to do that, but I don't think that would happen either. But that's.
So Drew, when we were talking about that ice rink
Yeah.
in that
right.
area, was that ours or is that? Was that
That is also unincorporated, it's due south.
yeah, but why were we involved?
They wanted to annex and get water from the
Oh,
village.
get
to
water
make
from
that-
Lake Bluff,
yeah.
that's correct,
Right.
okay.
Drew, how much of this corridor approximately is incorporated?
And from this particular visual aid, most of it.
Okay, up to the mobile?
exception of this area.
Okay, so it's just really the mobile? Okay.
And then it gets cut off, goes there and goes up to the sanctuary. But all this is within a jurisdictional planning area. And the village may be a utility provider to some of these properties down the road. And you can be silent on this too. So that's okay.
Which is where we started, but we thought we'd ask.
Yeah, so,
Right?
yeah,
Well, in all likelihood, one day they probably will have to come to us for
I would
water,
expect that, yeah.
because they're on wells right now, or a well. I personally don't have a problem with the mobile home park becoming part of the village. Also satisfies some of our housing issues for affordable housing. It's a type of housing that people need. If they were to approach us and say, we'd like your water and we don't mind coming in, I personally wouldn't oppose it at all. And let them remain otherwise the way they are.
So it sounds like the notion of it remaining essentially as is, with the way the plan describes it now, is the right play.
And I suspect you would also want the bullets listed there in terms of buffers and trail connection, all that to still be true for that. Like if you were, and how that would connect to the community, that would all make sense as well, yes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions about trail comments out in the industrial area. I don't
Well-
like the word trail for this
Yeah.
commercial area there.
And I think you know
Yes,
what the-
pedestrian access
Right.
with sidewalks, but we differentiate in our plan between
Right.
sidewalks and trails. And I don't think I had crossed out the trail network comment myself, because I don't think we need to be developing a trail along Highway 41.
Maybe in this particular section would be strike trail and put in pedestrian.
Yeah.
That's what I would do, but.
Okay. And I would tell you in general, for industrial and business areas, they were developed, when they were developed, they weren't developed with trails or connections or even sidewalks in some cases. The assumption was everybody was gonna drive, and now you've got people that are riding bikes to them from the train station and other things going on. So as the opportunity, whether it's a trail or a sidewalk, that non-motorized connection is important. So the 176 corridor is one that's, I don't know, interesting for a lot of reasons. And again, it's not all in the village, but it's the gateway to the village, right? When I started coming here before I knew much from the village, I thought, oh, I got off at Lake Bluff. This is Lake Bluff. And so, there are always questions of what does our gateway look like as people come into town. Oh, but it's not always in our control, right? So the idea is that over time, this is an area that is a gateway that it merits these properties being annexed so that the village has control over them in terms of their development when it happens, in terms of any code enforcement issues that might come up, and so on. So the idea was to look for these properties to incorporate, maybe to look at some incentives that are listed in the plan about ways to get them to do that, again, so that the village has got control is basically what it comes to. The properties are on great locations. They're not all great buildings, and the idea is that over time they will redevelop. These things from here, these are reading glasses, but it's got kind of a Lego block look to it. And I say that because in some ways they're interchangeable, and the plan kind of has it that way. So is this exactly where the commercial might be? Well, yeah, because it's at the intersection. But between that, could there be variations and differences? Absolutely. But again, to talk about those points that are important for whatever develops there, the idea of the trails, which we talked about, that it's connected, that there's a streetscape program that's applied to it. That's really what was emphasized here. We didn't have any specific policy questions just because of what I just described as the current condition. But that's the direction that the plan sets for this area. If there are any questions or suggestions on that, that would be great.
I just have a question then. When you're talking about realignment, who typically pays for that? That would be a developer that would be paying for it, or is that a village contribution, or all the above?
I would suggest to you that the goal when somebody comes and redevelops and things need to be moved around is that that's part of the development project.
Right.
If it's going to happen across properties or something needs to be attached or Drew has a different approach, then villages do get involved in that sort of thing.
I would say a specific example was the Target redevelopment. They had certain requirements to meet with regards to improvements to state assets.
Okay.
The village went out and sought a grant from the state to close a gap, and then the private sector filled the last piece of it, and improvements got made at Waukegan 176, and the widening and the turn lane got put in, so it was a joint effort.
Okay.
And that's how it usually works.
Got it. Thanks.
Michael, go ahead, George.
Oh, sorry. I had three comments jotted down. Number one, later on, you start providing these wonderful color legends underneath these same type of drawings, where you have the bright colors. I'd like to see the color legends on all of these sketches up front. We have to wait till we get way back in the document to start seeing the color legend. Number two, for an exhibit like this, if this is this more or less the size of the plan, that graphics like that be enlarged so that you don't have to use a magnifying glass to read it, number one, so that the picture's on one page and then the text is on the next.
Here's the way I've myself, a paper guy, I've come to the realization that the more often this is going to be on somebody's desktop computer. That's where they're looking at it. They'll be able to drill in, drill out, and that's the mindset. That's the way it is. Yeah.
I would tell
we talked about that earlier. I said even like most comp plans today are built never to be printed.
This is why you've got a landscape, and we did talk about this. This is why there's a landscape this is why there's a landscape instead of portrait orientation, because people read these things on their computers, and the landscape version makes everything bigger. And so that's the reason that we did this. The other thing too, and George, if this doesn't bother you, then I'll be very disappointed. North is not always up on these graphics. It makes me crazy. The reason it's done is to be able to make the graphics larger, George. Right? So there's trade-offs in all of that.
You should look at his computer. Look how easy it is to
Anyway, the color legend is more important.
Color legend is sound no matter what.
And then my same comment in this area, totally supportive and would insist that we have a recommendation that there be a structured sidewalk on the north side, but that our main trail is on the other side. And we've made a big point back in the plan of differentiating between sidewalks and trails. We don't need a fully developed trail on both sides of 176, but we need a nice wide sidewalk all along the north side of 176.
Cool, thank
And
you.
then people can cross at the appropriate signalized intersections to get to the trail.
Excellent, thank you.
It is terrifying to watch little kids walking along
the
there.
bus.
It's
Yeah.
horrible. So, yeah.
Michael, the parcel to the far east with the detention pond, with the 41-176 interchange construction project, is that gonna, I mean, is that gonna be the parcel? Or is right away gonna take away some of that, or what's gonna happen?
Well,
Michael, I can answer that.
I knew you would, Andrew, thank you.
Yeah, so per preliminary plans, that is where they anticipate building a detention area.
Zoom in.
IDOT, right next to the highway on the west side. So that we showed it there. It may not be spatially exactly what they're planning, per their plans, but we recognize that space needs to be set aside for.
Okay, so it's relatively accurate, looking forward 10 years or whatever. Thank you.
And the other reason to put it there is to just treat it as a bit of an amenity as well. All right, stormwater management has it's got an amenity aspect to it.
Good with fish.
Okay.
No.
Pond hockey in the winter.
Without objection, we'll move on. We'll talk about 800 Green Bay Road. And this, Mr. Chair, is maybe the first example of what you were talking about, which is where the plan should indicate the village's complete comfort with this remaining in a state as it is now. Is that where you were with that? Is that what the,
That's where I'm
is that where the, is that the group comfortable with that?
Yes.
Agree.
That would be lovely. If possible.
Okay.
And if not possible, there's a lot of lovely, open, undeveloped space that should be prioritized. As we talk about developing the last developable ooh, spaces.
It's a word in the planning world.
It's the third bullet, in fact.
Oh, am I staring at it? Like, that sounds like a strange word,
It's
yeah.
for cluster development.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but keep the open space too.
So just go back to the notion that we talked about a little bit in terms of these larger estates and larger development parcels. There's a few things about them. One, we've not specified a density or zoning district, right? We've specified those kinds of characteristics that you were just mentioning as being essential to maintain. We'll talk about how many and what when somebody comes to propose a development to us, and likely use the PRD or some aspect of the zoning. So we haven't included a number. We haven't talked about density, but a lot of these and the plan in the housing section and a couple other sections talks about incorporating notions of missing middle here. And missing middle was part of the discussion, and Opticos was here and showed a lot of their wonderful work in doing that. As we talked about housing, as we talked about housing affordability, we talked a lot about the need for diversifying housing. And this is one of the places that it comes up, is that this is a place to do it, right? And that smaller lots, pardon me, smaller lots or development of some of the townhomes or cottages that Opticos showed would be acceptable in these areas. Again, not to cover the area with it, but as a trade-off for preserving the open space and helping meet these other plan goals about diversifying housing and so on and so forth in smaller lots. And let's be clear, it diversifies housing. We're still not talking about affordable housing. We're talking about housing that's potentially more affordable. And I was asking the applicant in the last case, are you familiar with School Street that he was talking about in Libertyville? If you're not, next time you're up there, take a look or look at it on Google. It's an adorable little area. The lots, he told me, are 29 feet wide.
Wow.
Right? So kind of like, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge a house by its lot width. 29 feet, they're very close. It's a very urban little area. It's adorable. And I think within 2 years of them being built, which is already 10 years ago, you could get any one of them for $1 million. Right? So we're not talking about cheap housing. We're talking about different kinds of housing.
Right.
that east of Milwaukee or west? East, okay, I know what you're talking about.
So are we generally comfortable with that notion that we've advanced about, these are areas that, yeah, you know what, if they want to stay as estates, that's fine with the village. If they're going to redevelop, we've got these list of concerns that are throughout the plan that we want you to address. We're not going to set a density, but we're going to get you to work with us to make sure that you meet our objectives, and that we're going to be open, not granting you the right to, but we're going to be open to talking about different kinds of housing. That's a theme throughout. Okay, thanks. That's very helpful.
And then your question at the bottom of the page, before you jump off,
Is essentially that.
I would
but
be
if there's-
firmly in favor of the second part.
I'm sorry, George?
I would be firmly in favor of the second part of the alternative there, remain neutral in terms of density, not be trying to identify the density up front.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Neutral and compatible.
That's what I circled.
And I'm just curious, so have the owners of, let's say, 800 Green Bay, just as you were talking about Tangley Oaks, have the owners been, do they know they're being talked about like this?
When the village does, the short answer, no.
Okay.
But when the village does comprehensive land use plan updates or text amendments, we do our best to communicate to them. I mean, and we have mass communicated that we've been talking about this. If people were
Okay,
curious,
but not specific reach out?
we could, I mean, that's difficult to
I mean,
do.
just to say, hey, we're,
Yeah.
you're a topic in this plan.
Even in small communities like this, we never get to where we have the capacity or the time to contact owners. And I would suggest to you that's for the better. I mean, imagine how we would freak people out if we called and said, hey, we're thinking about the future of your property. You want to come have coffee?
No, I just didn't know whether they're
Yeah.
gonna see this at some point and be totally surprised.
We would love to hear from any of them and sit down with any of them, but just reaching out individually is just not practical.
Okay.
Great question, thank you. So there's a couple of things to the business park. One is maintaining its presence and its value to the community as a business park. And the plan lays out ideas about potentially helping with facades, that, you know, some of the buildings are getting a little bit older. Looking at opportunities to perhaps do some streetscape in there to have a somewhat better facade for the whole area, right? That's something that is an economic development action, is to have a higher end business park feel to it as the area begins to age. And the plan, the draft talks about a couple things like special service areas and tools that can be used to do that. The second part of it is the yellow that's over on the right side there. That's the housing development that we talked about. There was a presentation, and I forget the name of the woman who did the presentation. Help.
Mickey Collins.
Oh, no, sorry. Was-
Mickey Collins.
Mickey Collins.
Mickey, that's right, Mickey. Who gave a presentation about a lot of this redeveloping as residential and mixed use. And at the time we talked about it, and you all thought that the idea of some potential redevelopment and some housing here had some merit. What we're suggesting in the plan is to, not to split the baby a little bit, but to acknowledge that the amenities that people would want to live near are to the north of that, which is to the left. You know, to be close to the restaurants and the shopping and whatnot that's there, rather than turning the whole thing into a residential neighborhood, which may happen in the course of the next plan or the plan after that. But the idea of doing this is that it's really not that many parcels if somebody wanted to do it. There's actually some feasibility to this and some benefit of diversity of housing and being close to amenities. So again, this is not going to change the zoning of those properties. It's not going to change what those owners can do with their property tomorrow. It's just saying, if somebody called and said, hey, is the village open to this? The plan acknowledges it, but acknowledges too that it be closer to the amenities, that we're not looking to put people in the middle of an industrial park, business park, sorry.
Should you put like a hotel in that equation?
Absolutely. The idea of it being more of a mixed use was frankly what Mickey had talked about, and I think we'd be comfortable with that from a land use perspective, certainly. If
And then
that's
the
something
other
that we
thing,
wanna-
should we include trying to connect the two parcels of the industrial park? If it came to pass that those areas were available, so you don't have to leave one part to get to the other part.
Yeah, good point.
You what?
there's a trail on the east side that's not really present shown in this plan. And there was a previous plan that did have corridors connecting north-south to certain properties that would take easements to do it to that point.
Right.
My recollection is that is not part of this plan, the transportation section.
But should it be? For some future,
Let us take a look at where that could maybe happen.
I think that was a missed opportunity when it was originally developed, absolutely. So if we can encourage it for the future, I think that would be a bonus.
That's a nice ad. We'll look how to do
It
that.
would be a huge plus, Elliott, particularly because Waukegan Road traffic's only going to get worse and worse, and turning left out of
that's miserable.
these roads.
Yeah.
So to provide everybody with access to the signalized intersection. Because IDOT isn't going to let us put a traffic light at every intersection. But if there could be a connector road in there somewhere, when a property redevelops, it could happen. There may be a bullet point.
I think it,
Pedestrian.
Either one.
Oh,
I would
I
say-
thought,
I would
I
say
thought you
No,
meant
no,
the
I didn't
roadway.
mean, I meant automobile.
Oh, okay.
But I think, if you have an auto, then a pedestrian becomes, but you can do, certainly a pedestrian would be better as well,
would
so you don't
be
have to walk on Waukegan.
easy, I think
Start with
It's
the
probably
pedestrian.
even easier to do than an
I think
automobile road.
the vehicle traffic would be more important, as
Yes.
George mentioned, to allow access to the traffic signal.
Well, and also I think trying to get that either trail or pedestrian even down to the border with Lake Forest, just because the hospital's right there. And I would think that at some point, people are gonna start walking from the hospital, I mean, there's a lot of staff.
Escaping the hospital, getting out of it.
Well, that too.
Right, I mean, if that is truly mixed use and there's housing there or a hotel.
restaurants
People
and-
may wish to go for a walk. And if you can't go very far, then you have to get in your car. So, might be nice to walk out the door. There is plenty of green space in the area, if you could connect to that, so.
That's a great point. Yeah, definitely, we will add some sort of language about connecting those two roadway loops, is what I like to call them, I guess, in the business park, the north and south end, and kind of having more of a grid pattern. I think that we can definitely make mention of that in the sub area recommendations.
Is there, or are there existing buildings where the yellow structures are now?
There are.
There are a couple?
There are a
Okay,
couple.
I thought there were,
That's your
but,
luxury car storage area.
Yeah, it's,
yeah, I wondered. Okay.
And again, if a couple additional parcels were gonna be part of this, or less parcels, that's not what we're trying to do, but we tried to just pick a couple, so we weren't looking at property acquisition of 9, we weren't creating an impossibility here, because we thought this idea had merit as you're closer to the amenity.
Yeah.
No, looks good.
Downtown. Well, y'all have had the nerve to start approving stuff in the downtown while we're still planning for it, so.
We fixed it already.
That's just fine.
We done.
Check. Yeah, no, I haven't looked at it. I think the opportunity was great. So there's a lot in here about the central business district, about the downtown. It's primarily about how it can be refined and how to preserve it, and there's more in other parts of the plan, in the community character section, about how to continue to enhance the character and doing some things in alleys and with sidewalks. All that's very important as well, but this is more about potential development and design, and we've been talking, as we've gone through this, about the possibility of Block 2 potentially being a development area. Again, not suggesting it, not doing a design plan that says build these buildings, but to answer that question, if somebody says, what does the village want to see here? And you can see the little red around the sides of it talks about there being mixed use, and that's what that indicates. And we hear what you're saying, George, about the legends on here. But the idea is that it'd be mixed use. The question that was left, though, was really one of scale. And again, we can continue to not talk to that, but is this where new development, if it comes, would be 2 stories, would be 3 stories, would be 1 story? If there is a sense that one of those answers is definitely the right future for the village, as opposed to leaving that to be part of the development that comes before you. And Drew, I know you've been plugged into this, if there was something you wanted to add, I always appreciate it.
The only thing while you're mulling that over, we talked about this a little bit, a couple different times. This property right now, the village not only owns the Walnut corner, but 33 East North as well. I'm working with a small group of stakeholders to develop an RFP for this site. So if you have thoughts on that, now's a great time.
So including both buildings?
It's including both parcels, and high level scale should remain with R5, which I think is 34 feet height max. So that's existing scale, not pushing, that's like 2.5, not pushing 3. And then doing the best to save that trees, you know, if we, to the extent we can. And that's really, and the idea that it, you know, with all the conversations we've been having about expanding typologies of housing type, that probably residential, but maybe institutional or a combination thereof, that's kind of the mindset right now with the direction.
What's institutional mean?
Imagine maybe it's another place of worship or something that usually fringes CBDs. That's a common use. It could be the library downsized. It could be, you know, something like that.
It's not institution in the sense
In
of,
the sense of a public or, you know,
Insane
yes,
aside.
not as
A community use.
yes, going back to your hospital comment.
yes,
Yeah.
just curious.
So to answer your height question, back to the height question, I would not be opposed to language along the north side of Scranton to consider a maximum of 3 stories on Block 2, but that on the south side of North, if any of those to be developed, that it be no more than 2.5. Because they're
Resident.
facing a lot of single-family dwellings. In a 3-story building, a full 3-story building could get pretty darn massive.
I agree with you.
I think, yeah, I would say
Wow.
even on
First
even
time.
in Block 3, even the north side of Scranton, I think 3 stories would be too massive there. I mean, it would overshadow the south side of Scranton.
Good.
So I'd be willing to restrict it to 2.
What's the zoning say?
Even though we have what we're gonna have in Block 3 and
Well, that is a
the
that is a
Block 1,
two-story
and Block
building.
1 is 3 stories?
But it's sort of
Right.
3.
Well, the former Village Market building is not, so we'd be stepping down and then stepping back up.
I'd be
If it's-
comfortable with 3.
I'm comfortable with 3. Again, we would have the ability to lean into that. You know, if it is well-designed, it doesn't necessarily look as hulking as it could.
Maybe a 3rd-story setback like the
Right.
Block
Yeah.
1.
And that's, you know, I want to, by saying restricting it to 2, I just want to avoid a developer thinking they can have 3 stories straight up, is all.
Right.
But I would agree, you know, a step back 3rd story could be,
Just write down that it
could
should
be
be
appropriate.
attractive to our eyes,
Yeah.
and then we'll go from there,
there you
right?
go, yeah.
What I'm hearing and what I would suggest we do here is that we talk about up to 3 stories, but the language in here already talks about being compatible, being in context, that's already there. But what you're raising here about setbacks, step backs, and that sort of thing is a way to further define that, so that's clear to whoever might be talking about it. That would be a really, that would be a good way to describe it that's in keeping with the tone we've taken in the rest of the document.
Okay.
Does Block 2 have any historical value to the village if it was redeveloped?
I think by code, each of the buildings are probably 50 years old and would have to go through the process for demolition review, but I don't believe that there's anything in terms of an architect that's noteworthy or No.
No.
Is what I have the best way to
Because you
describe
wouldn't
it.
want to do it on the south side,
And
because those
not-
buildings are
Yeah.
Right.
historic.
Yes, I think that's 100% true, and that's how the streetscape and the structures are viewed, the south side of the street is. And if I remember, the designation of the historic preservation of that does not include that side of the block, if I remember correctly.
And that parcel, the Walnut block that you were talking about, Drew, I mean, frankly, I sort of like that drawing, but I like the balance of a green space with the density of some units, which is,
In a perfect world, this
Yeah.
alley existed that could serve it, right? That would be a home run, that would help.
that would be great.
But this is all private today.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things we've talked about is the village owns this parking lot. Has access, we lease this. So right now, there's some language saying, here's what the restrictions are currently in terms of parking demand you have to satisfy. Footnote, but we're open to creative solutions. Because a developer may come through and say, hey, I can do this, but I can't park it by code. Can you give me a break on that? And so there's different ways around, because not everybody needs 2 parking stalls, right?
Right,
So,
yeah. I mean, this is not a city. So we don't need to set aside green spaces, and yet a public green space is different than somebody's yard that's private. So seeking some balance there is nice. Especially as we continue to, we're not building out, but still the green space is essential.
Other thoughts? Excellent, thank you. So this is the area adjacent, what was kind of north of the area we were just talking about on the R5, and to look at this area. So the plan suggests that this is an area where perhaps there could be, over time, as development occurs, some higher density, and that this is an opportunity for some of those missing middle ideas to take place in terms of those small duplexes and triplexes and things that Opticos showed. The thing that's neat about, just to reiterate what Opticos shared with everybody, was that the thing that's really neat about the missing middle concept is that it's a slightly higher density, but it's done in a scale and context and character of a single-family home. And so obviously it's a little bigger, but it's not a big box necessarily. It's got dormers and it looks like a single-family home. We were just in another community finishing up a comprehensive plan where we did the same sort of thing, where we talked about allowing increased density if that it's done within the context. And this would be done through a zoning change, just the way Opticos had shared, that you meet these design standards. So this is an area that has been talked about to do that. Again, emphasizing preserving scale, but mixing the type of housing that's done, and that it be done in a way that's respectful of what's there.
Just to kind of add on to that, one of the real central focuses of the sub area is also just kind of cleaning up some streets as development occurs. That probably doesn't sound very kind, but I mean, some of the streets have on-street parking, perpendicular parking that may get in the way of the sidewalk, and it might be a little difficult to navigate, and there might be a lot of curb cuts. The idea that this plan presents, at least for this area, is to also kind of orderly, to kind of make the street grid a bit more orderly, adding singular access points where multiple buildings might be able to access a singular driveway, making it kind of safer, fewer conflict points between pedestrians and cars, and allowing for more opportunities to plant trees and things like that. So that is not a broad sweeping thing, but as development occurs, our hope is that that shared driveways and we can have sort of agreements in place for that as the area, as development occurs.
my mind, that's an ideal area to do that missing middle if it ever came to pass.
And that gets to the plan, the contents of the plan talks about one of the early recommendations, primary objectives is rewriting R5 to help facilitate those types of outcomes.
Right.
Next slide.
This is the elephant in the room.
It's getting to be old
Elephant? I would tell you that the question at the bottom sort of reiterates what we've talked about before, about the language talking about compatible to the adjacent neighborhood in terms of density, rather than specifying the actual number. So that's really our primary question for you here. Now, again, the plan addresses this with the understanding that there's an agreement in place given the litigation that happened, and so there's certainly some controlling factors there. So the plan is aware of that, and it takes that same notion of not prescribing what a density would be, but it talks about the importance of the separation in the buffer with all the trees and open space that's shown at the north end of the Stonebridge site. An idea that Witchwood Lane becomes a boulevard and that it's got a nice open space feel to it, and that there's a more open feel in terms of the separation, but that there's trails and that there's a potential to connect, and maybe even something that's there for emergency vehicles. But
Yeah, I think the last time we showed you this, in the next slide, that boulevard concept, no, one more, I think. No, go the other way. Keep going. One more.
I don't think it's in the front.
it's not. It's in the plan.
George
but
got
it's-
these slides, obviously.
I got it out on the front.
This is an alternative design.
I've got a note in the back about getting.
I'm sure you do.
Well, and that's I think what we're talking about is the cross section of the
Yes,
of the
yes,
possible
yeah.
road.
Yes.
And I would tell you that the intent of that cross section is to show width and green as a separation between them. And whatever other concerns or questions there are about them, that's the intent. We're certainly open to refine it, but that would be the intent.
And the discussion point on this is really kind of like the question to talk about, and this is one where right now the village's comp plan says to the development of the Stonebridge site should be somewhere along in the middle of the continuum of what's to the north and what's to the south. And so the question is there generally, if there's any more specificity, that can be addressed if you have any more thoughts about that. All that plus preserve the Jensen landscaping, do these other things. So there's some more specific land planning goals, but in terms of density, is there any further thought on that? Or is what's in the plan far enough as you feel comfortable going?
I think from the neighbors, you're going to want to maintain the same density as off of Witchwood. I can't imagine they would want multifamily there, especially with the traffic patterns onto Green Bay Road and onto Witchwood. So I like the language, remain neutral and compatible to stay in there.
Just as a reminder, this is one of the sites we talked about missing middle being sprinkled in there too.
Well, maybe sprinkled, but not.
Well, no, but that's how the original plan was, right? It had the manor home and the gatehouse being carved out into condos, and there was attached and detached housing, so it had a blend even then.
Yeah, but there was never a missing middle. Those original New England builders' homes were expensive.
Well, again, missing middle doesn't mean affordable,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Right. And there were the duplexes and.
I see what you're saying.
But I was concerned historically, Drew, about the density of the, plan 10 years ago. And are we contemplating greater density or lesser density or?
That's what we're asking you.
Yeah, because we have a state south and then we have traditional neighborhood north. I think the density historically was too great, but.
So in your perspective, if the continuum is, north, south, you're pushing more this way, towards the south, in terms of less dense.
Well, historically, that was where I pushed when it might have been economically feasible.
You've pushed the first piece on the board here, sir, so.
I'm concerned about density.
Yep.
And I thought it was overly dense, a decade ago, but.
Okay, and for a point of reference, Gary, and I'm not exactly sure of the numbers anymore. I used to know the numbers, but
84, I think.
85, close.
But he doesn't know the number.
But he doesn't know.
But the original subdivision at that density, units per acre, was still slightly less than the R2. You count up all the lots in 47 acres to the north, you'll come up with more homes. So that's, to give you a point of reference, it was less dense than the neighborhood to the north.
But
Slightly.
But the lot size would be
In terms of
smaller.
units per acre, dwelling units per acre. I mean, you can measure
It
it
was
different ways.
cluster housing, but more land around it.
Right.
And don't forget, the terrace has gotten bigger too. I mean, at least a lot of those houses have kind of morphed more than they were back when we were originally starting Stonebridge.
I don't, yeah, I think the cluster houses, I think that's a very good idea. Again, for this spot, it doesn't mean they're going to be affordable, but it's missing middle. There are a lot of people who don't really care to have a yard. That certainly is something that's shifted over time. And especially, there's so much access to green space. I don't know if you are going to feel the desire for a yard. So I think we need to remain open, and compatible is a really vague statement in this sense because it's between two.
It's safe.
It's safe, yeah. We'll go with that.
And I would note to encourage multifamily, that sounds like encourage multifamily on the entire property, which I, of course,
Right.
would be fully against. So I don't remember exactly what it says in the draft of the plan, but, I think encouraging multifamily for this.
Can I at least clarify what that intent was? I think the conversation was, what if a developer came through and said, I want to recreate the manor and gatehouse and make it condos again?
Yeah. Okay.
Because I know at the time, the original developer said it would be a lot less expensive if I was able to scrape
Tear it
this
down.
and rebuild it and
So instead of encourage, can we say be open to?
yes.
Sure.
Yes.
But that was the idea, that if it got done, even if it was townhomes, that it recreate the manor home.
Sure. Or we could say encourage limited multifamily, or, something along the lines. I just don't want it to sound like that's what we want to see on the
keeping the
entire
entire
property.
Well, how about encourage a mix of single family, multifamily, missing middle?
Ben, do you have a problem if they were as specific as the concept about the manor gatehouse, like, for example? To say if that is the extent of comfort, then let's write that.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think specific of what you want is a good thing, because we know that at some point, somebody's going to present us with a plan. We don't know who, but somebody's going to come forward, and this is a property that's been difficult, it's a property that's been litigated, and ultimately, one of the tools that we have to steer what we want is going to be the comp plan. To the extent we can point to something, I'll tell you, as a lawyer, if I have to litigate again this site, the ability to say, read page whatever it is, page 79 of our comp plan, and it says X, Y, and Z, and you're proposing something that is A, B, and C. It does, therefore it's, so I, if it's too broad and too open, and, it makes it more difficult. So if it's, the language I'm hearing now, I think is some direction, right? Whether it's clustering, whether it's the idea of some, multifamily, but also preserving single-family homes, open to the recreation of a manor house, that gives us direction to go from. And a tool.
Not that we're preparing for the deposition, Ben, but on page 64, it says, if multifamily housing is considered in the future development, it should be limited to a small portion of the overall development, the development of multifamily housing on the site of the former manor house, employing the design that mimics the former estate home architecture, can advance housing diversity and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah,
Sounds great.
yeah.
Yeah, we listen to you. So, yeah, I guess what I want to say is that that's what the plan conveys, exactly what you're talking about. And there's actually, if you go back and look, there's some sketches in there of the manor house and how it might be redone to create that character.
The risk of opening an old wound, and I think I know the answer, but this development, and think of Tangley Oaks, which I would characterize as very autocentric, right? There's one in and out, lots of homes. This development is not unlike that. At the moment, there is an emergency pass-through, but does it have to be emergency? To open it up provides outlets for other drivers to get in and out and release the pressure off single points of access. It's good planning, it's good transportation planning. It's different, but now's the time to have a conversation. Would you be open to that in the future?
100%.
Yeah, with all due respect, Dan, I'm diametrically opposed.
Why I went first.
And Gary, I'm back with you on this one, because the existing neighborhood is there. People have lived there for 40 or 50 years. If we were planning the entire area, I absolutely agree the street should be interconnected, but I am, as I am with the 10 acres, concerned with the concept of people that generally enjoy dead-end streets, which is essentially what all these are to the north. And suddenly you're encouraging cut-through traffic.
Yeah, the
Just
impact.
because they want to get out of there faster.
So let me, maybe if that is the general sentiment or concern, is maybe the way to couch it is, and I don't know if this is maybe worth or we're not doing, Ben, help me out here, but the idea of saying if acceptable to adjoining properties, is it okay? Because maybe, like, in my mind, the whole idea of what happened with the Skokie Preserve, of getting rid of the buffer, like, that was taboo forever. And then all of a sudden, get rid of it, and now those properties, people love those lots. And that's Western Sunsets, like, this is fantastic. So who knows what 20 years from now, different mindset.
Yeah, I don't know that I would phrase it as if acceptable.
Okay, that's what I asked.
To neighbors, because we're not delegating authority, right? And number one, we wouldn't, as a village, wouldn't want to do it, but there's also a legal concept of, it's from a zoning, it's not, if the neighbors say yes, then it's okay. So I think, after, with public input, would be a better way to state it, right? Because we certainly want the public input, but, yeah.
Well, and also keep in mind, if this is developed, relationships will form between the people who live in the new area and the people who live in the existing area. And being able to go back and forth without having to go out to Green Bay and around if they're driving is not a terrible option. And things may change, as you said, over time, which is why I liked the boulevard idea in the first place, because thinking of Center Avenue on the east side, it's a nice space. It's very accessible without being overwhelming. And there is separation. And I could see in the future that same sort of scenario laying out. I think that keeping an open mind for that is valuable.
I think you could accomplish that just by a bike trail and sidewalks and whatever, because it would be more efficient just to walk. I don't know if it's.
If it's winter and you're going to a dinner party, I'm gonna get some real scenarios now.
Yeah, I just think it would be devastating to the people who live on Sunset Terrace and the people who live on Hawthorne to have that threat of increased traffic coming through what historically was a quiet neighborhood. I think the boulevard concept on Witchwood is great. I think they suffered enough trauma a decade ago with all the activity. But to open up that former fire exit is just frightening to me.
How about another idea of just extending McLaren south?
Same problem. You're taking a neighborhood that is traditionally served by functionally all dead-end streets, and you're telling another 80 homes worth of people, 160 cars, that they can all now drive down your street where there were only 10 homes using it before. It's a dramatic increase in traffic.
But do you think that would be a primary traffic flow, realistically? I mean, it would really be to get back and forth between, moms picking up kids to go to some activity. And if you're going out through the neighborhood, you're going out to Green Bay. You're not going to cut through because that's a slower pathway. It's less direct.
Drew, would there ever be a light at Green Bay? Because I do think people will use the side street if there's going to be a line of people trying to get out at Green Bay because there's no easy traffic light. Is that a traffic light ever allowed? It's an IDOT road, I know.
It's a village road.
Oh, it's a village road.
South of
okay.
176, it's a village.
Oh, that's right, okay.
I may have to ask the engineer in the room, but I would doubt it. I know that when Stonebridge was proposed, they talked about installing a turn lane.
Right.
Dedicated turn lane. That's probably the most it would be. And right now, the Green Bay road plans, which, a year from now, we're going to be closing the bridge and, doing that work. The major planning objective of that street is to leave it like it is, keep it a neighborhood feel and to make it more, having signals there. I doubt that would be something the village would want, really. And here's one other wrinkle that who knows when this property will develop. And it is possible that even the property to the south of it could be roped in there, at that time, what that looks like. So thinking about more access, and that's so close to the bridge, that makes it harder to have another access point there. Just throwing that out there, so.
Is there any repercussions from the previous legal activity in redeveloping this? Is there anything that would put a damper on redevelopment based on what transpired from a legal point of view, when the previous owners left?
Current owners.
I mean, the
Let
damper.
me try to answer it this way, if I may.
Go.
So I think the settlement agreement doesn't change. In fact, it underscores the village's goals to have that property developed. And that settlement agreement lays out the process for that to happen, which pretty much mirrors the development process that's on the books. It's slightly different, but it's very similar to the village's PRD, and that's what it lays out. I don't think anything that's been discussed today would impact that, in fact, we're trying to give more direction to the development community in terms of what the village envisions for the site, which is a good thing because they would have less risk and spend less time going through the process if they have greater clarity on what the village wants there. So that's the value to the development community, is the more specificity the village can provide them up front, theoretically, the faster the review process.
Well, the previous lawsuit has nothing to do with going forward with the development.
No.
No. I mean, the only thing that was done as part of the settlement was the preservation of some of the acreage for landscaping. So that's really, there's landscaping that's
Yeah.
commitments.
There's effectively a conservation easement that's
Right.
kind of a that's in place right now until and unless somebody comes through the process. And then it's presumed, and the village makes it clear in that settlement agreement, that we envision it's going to be a PRD and that there's going to be a conservation area on the Jens Jensen. And so we wanted to telegraph to the universe, that's our expectation, and that's how it's reflected in that.
Yeah.
And were the lots that that was the 5 lots or whatever the number of lots that it's now, were those envisioned as neighborhoods or?
No, it was just the simplest way to account for the dedication of the roadway.
Okay.
And it was the simplest way to make as few as lots as possible.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, the presumption, it will absolutely have to be subdivided, because unless you're going to have 5 manor houses or something, I mean, the reality is it's going to be subdivided again as part of the process, but that's not a roadblock to development.
Okay.
Who owns it now?
Same person.
Same person.
Peter Kite?
Peter Kite, yeah.
And he wanted to put, at last look, as I recall,
100 plus.
35 more. He wanted like 118 units
Yeah.
instead of the originally approved 85. So personally, I wouldn't have a problem with putting something in there in terms of density that it could, other flowery language to be added, but that the cap, absolute cap should be no higher than the unit density, dwelling unit per acre density to the north. And I think that number comes out somewhere around
And-
90 units for Stonebridge.
And as strategically, Ben, is it better to leave the language like it is or go as far as?
Well, I don't have a problem with it legally, I think, to say that this is what we desire to see. And if that is the desire, I think that it may be useful to make clear so it's less likely somebody appears and says, here, I have a great idea, 150 units, or whatever their number they're gonna come up with. If you wanna add more clarity, I don't see a downside to that. And also, if somebody does have an idea that is at odds with our comprehensive plan, nothing stops somebody from asking for an amendment. And then it would be up to the village to decide whether or not we want to, and we think it's appropriate based on the proposal.
So again, just so we're all working from the same notion here, the language about this talks about an objective for the area, about establishing density and urban design expectations for future development, talks about the 77 plan, recommends that the redevelopment of the center, so on and so forth. R2 area, sorry. A transition between the two areas. The maximum density will ensure impacts of development. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going through here to try and figure out what it says. It's got that kind of vague language that we've been talking about. And the question is whether or not it needs to be more specific to reflect the policy of the village.
Well, I think if you cap it at no greater density than the neighborhood to the north.
Right, and so that's what it says. So it says, to create this transition, the density of the future development should not exceed the neighborhood to the north in terms of the dwelling units per acre. That's what the plan says now.
Okay.
What?
So the ceiling is there.
I guess the only distinction is the 10 acres or so that's not buildable. So you're really looking at 37 acres that's buildable.
And what the plan's talking about, the overall density being based, the density being based on the overall size of the site, but goes back to that idea of clustering the development that we've talked about. So that sounds like language that the group is comfortable with, is that sets the cap and it reflects the neighborhood to the north. We've sort of slipped away from the question of whether or not there's an automotive as opposed to pedestrian connection between the areas.
Haven't we?
And short of a vote, I'd look for consensus on whether or not that's something that we would not state in the plan, overtly state in the plan, or find some language that talks about being open to it in the plan if, insert caveats here. And I look for the policy direction of the PCZBA on this difficult matter, Mr. Chair.
From my own personal perspective, I would not address it in the plan and leave it as is.
In which case, if somebody came and wanted to do it, they would have to explain to you why it was a good idea, but it wouldn't answer that question, what does the village want to see here? Is that where you're at?
I think that's probably the best I can do to get a consensus, as opposed to driving for an adamant no. I don't know, I mean, I know where Ann's at, I know where George is at, but I don't know where the other four are at, so maybe we should find out.
Just make it one way, how's that? It's a compromise. No.
I'm neutral. You know,
One way
if somebody, I don't think we should push for it, but if a developer comes to us with a creative solution, I don't think we should be against it. So,
Don't you think it would be a nightmare for 82 or 160 cars trying to get on Green Bay Road for work in the morning, or, there's no way that's gonna be feasible without a traffic light or something there.
Do it at Tangley.
Smaller than Tangley. It's smaller than Tangley. It will be small, well, unless the density really goes crazy.
I don't know, it just,
Yeah, they did
I'm comfortable with not taking a position.
Well, I don't
now
think we
and
should take a
seeing
position.
what-
I'm just talking
Seeing what the development plan is.
what it would be like, but I guess you're right, Tangley doesn't have a traffic light, so.
And there was, a decade ago, Elliot, a traffic study that was conducted. I don't know if it's still relatively current. George probably remembers.
The Tangley?
No, for Stonebridge.
Oh, for that,
Wasn't it,
yeah,
George?
A traffic study?
Yeah,
Yeah, but the numbers have
dramatically changed.
skyrocketed since then.
Plus, wasn't it empty nester at that point, too?
Yes.
55.
Yeah, so we weren't, age restricted, right, thanks.
Yeah.
So we weren't worried about school traffic and things like that. But originally Tangley was supposed to also kind of be empty nester. Not age restricted, but empty nester. Didn't work out, but.
So it was a
I don't know,
sanctuary.
how is Tangley in the morning? I've never
Oh,
tried to get out of there.
Messy.
You're only 1 or 2 deep.
Yeah.
I think the critical factor there is school traffic,
Yeah.
Right,
otherwise, not bad.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to address it one way or the other in the
I think
plan.
leaving it open-ended is probably the best way.
Fine, clarity.
We'll leave it as is.
Yep.
But we had to have one that was hard, come on.
Great conversations.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. Thank you very much.
Now we get it again, same question.
This has been really interesting and fulfilling throughout, so I appreciate everybody's attention to the hard questions as well. So, the village-owned 10 acres has the same question. The plan has got indications of what I talked about before, is that this is an area that presents the opportunity for different types of housing. This was actually one of the areas that Opticos looked at, and the notion of this being someplace where the village would consider missing middle housing is solid in the plan. Doesn't specify a density, doesn't specify how many, that's all gonna be part of a development process. So it fits that standard that I introduced all of these with, and is consistent with that. The question we had was whether or not a single roadway connection to West Terrace neighborhood would be appropriate to show in the plan so that when this developed, it was connected. So,
After our last conversation, you really want to bring that up?
well, it's on the slide. What do you want me to do?
Let me pose the question slightly differently. If you
Yeah.
remember from the Opticos study, they showed the development of that property in a couple of different scenarios. One was low intensity, which is essentially extending
High
the,
intensity and higher intensity, that's all Opticos knows. No,
Now.
no, the unit count was
yeah.
way
One of the things
above.
we talked about, maybe that's where in my head, but I could have sworn there was an examination of, no, it was in that the study was, what does it look like as currently platted, right? If you remember, this was supposed to be developed in a certain way. And so the idea is, well, what if it was developed that way, as originally platted? Is having the roads extend in that manner, is that fair, if it's developed like that, then that would be appropriate and acceptable. However, if it was developed differently at a higher level of density, then you'd want to maybe be silent on it and revisit at the time. I suspect that's the way you think, but I don't know. So that's one of the things we were talking about internally, and that's how we wanted to at least tee it up.
I guess one comment, Drew, is that the neighborhood, so to speak, has relied upon the fact, I think either directly or indirectly, that there would be no development, at least off of McLaren. I'm not even sure if they're aware of potential development of the 10 acres, so to speak, but we'll find out shortly on that.
Some of them on the west side and on the south side are, because we've talked about that when we went through and we sent letters to folks who maybe had improvements that drifted off their property. And so we said, and by the way, because some people have wanted to clear that area as well with buckthorn, and we said, you can do that, but know that someday something may happen here. The village has considered senior housing there before. There was a big process, and some people knew that, some people didn't. They were like, oh, interesting. So
It's the institution that Elliot was talking about.
But I guess, I think my position on egress out of the 10 acres, and I'm strongly opposed to that because of the adverse impact, again, from my perspective, on the neighborhood, so to speak.
I guess my opinion is it would also, if the entry and exit would be on 176, that would also be adverse to that neighborhood and to 176. So if there is some other creative solution to doing that, but I think trying to increasing the traffic on 176 through however many units could be fit there, I think that would be a struggle.
Now, I always thought that IDOT wouldn't allow a cut there, or,
We've talked about, would it be possible to do something using this shared, is there a way to work something out? Because we want to maintain, this can get moved, but this is a lot of right of way. We'd have to get a permit, and the question has not been asked, to my knowledge, and even when, George, you remember, but I came at the tail end of the senior development, there was the idea that it would have an access off this,
with a light,
but no,
No.
not with a light.
Okay.
Generally speaking,
no lights there,
there's not a
right?
lot of traffic flow out of senior facilities. There
Right,
just
right,
really isn't.
true.
Well, there's always the ambulance.
They come with their own lights.
They come with their own lights.
Elliot's very morbid tonight.
He is.
You're saying the kids aren't coming to visit
A
all
tough
the
day at the
time?
office today.
Things are looking bleak.
Just reality.
But that's, we've talked about, like, the senior facilities that have been built, there really isn't a lot of traffic flow.
Right.
And to Dr. Miller's point, I think the average, and maybe you know this as well, but I think you can expect for every door, for every room, that's one ambulance call per year. That's kind of the rule of thumb.
What about the thought of widening 176 to 3 lanes, so you have a turn lane?
So historically, the village's position on that has been, don't do that. The village has resisted that, and it's kind of like, I think the deer path model in Lake Forest is, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
So the kind of the way to keep it narrow and let that be a,
Sure. But it really isn't. I mean, if you go in the morning, you go in the evening, and more so because of Mariani. So they have a place where the trucks can sort of get out of the roadway
yeah,
until they turn, because they just block traffic in
Yeah.
season.
yeah. Again, that the mindset of the village has to keep it like it is. There are ongoing traffic studies by IDOT. The village has petitioned them to re-examine the signals from 41 west to Waukegan to try to manipulate the timing to get people through faster because of the perceived and real increases in traffic. So that's even under review, and they've been tweaking that as we speak. So dialing it up, dialing it back, trying to find a better spot for that.
Could the bridge that was redone recently, can that be I mean,
It's already-
It's built,
three
it's
lanes.
built
It
to
is
be
3 lanes?
wide,
Okay.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying. We don't
Okay.
have, there's not that much that has to be done.
And even when they do the 41-176 intersection, that the width of 176 does widen and tapers down by in front of Public Works. But that plan does get a little wider as it moves east, but still it pinches down again.
And there's mention here, I know we're not there yet, about, putting something over the railroad or under. That's not feasible either. I think we've gone through that talk at one point.
I don't think within a couple of lifetimes, no. I
Right.
think it's just economically difficult.
could you ever do just an eastbound cut on 176, or has that ever?
Oh, like a right in, right out only? Again, it has not been explored with IDOT, so,
Okay.
If,
think-
sorry.
no, go ahead.
I don't love the 176 access either, George, just so you know. I'm opposed to that one. But from an egress standpoint, if that were only developed as it was initially laid out, the plots for single family, keeping up with that.
Same lot sizes, all that, yeah.
Yeah. Would that be sufficient? I mean, that would be sufficient then, right? Safety-wise.
The roads?
Planning-wise, yeah.
I think the road, if you did all 3 roads and it circled around, just kind of extended that, I think that would be enough to manage that, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And how many units would that give about? Do you know?
I didn't do the count.
Okay, sorry.
George?
Haven't
Not
counted that,
85.
in-
Just
haven't
less than
counted that in a
85.
long time.
Looks like maybe 6 or 7 on each road. I mean, just roughly looking at the lots that are on there. So 6 or 7 on each side of 3 roads.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you're not adding a huge load to any one street.
Right,
If you're only talking about a dozen lots
right.
And if,
for each street.
and you can see the layout here is kind of superimposed for us, right? Traditional subdivision layout, the way subdivisions are designed, roads end, they stub, they get connected with the next development. The question here is how many years has it been since this was developed and now this is going to develop? And people develop expectations of it's always going to be like that.
Yeah.
So that's what we're weighing.
Talk about inventory. I mean, you think those lots would be in demand?
I think so. Sell them out today, yes.
Is there any greater comfort level with the connection than there was for that last property we talked about, which will go unnamed?
Well, it sounds like the discussion is trending away from the statement, explore singular connection. The way to lessen the impact is to have all 3
Have all
streets
have all the
run through,
connections.
which may indeed be appropriate depending on what goes in there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, all right, so maybe then the way to say it for the plan would be like the village would be, pursue exploration of multiple vehicular connection points to support or redistribute traffic out of existing neighborhoods, something like that.
I also thought that historically, it'd be nice to have a park in that area. And I don't know whether that should be incorporated into the plan or not, but
The second bullet talks about connect to the south is right, the preserve,
Right.
right? And so that, Opticos did have little pocket parks in their plans, to your point. This, I think if you developed it consistent with the neighborhood to the east, then a connection to the south would be a home run, right? Because getting into that. And I don't know, my gut would tell me the park district doesn't want any more assets. But I could be wrong. But I think that maintain another park with the proximity to their existing, they just want to be able to get people to the other side of the street, right? But to your point, like the Stonebridge site was looked at as a potential park facility because in that quadrant of the village, there isn't one. Although I don't know, maybe the mindset has changed with the development and use of the Skokie Preserve as it's passive recreation to some degree. There's not a lot of, but it's still nonetheless, it's much more utilized than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
There's a boardwalk going in there.
Yeah.
Upcoming, so.
So I think that has changed the game, so to speak, but it doesn't mean there couldn't be some smaller parking pot, maybe that's a comment, explore the necessity of another recreation asset in this quadrant of the village.
And it may not have to be controlled by the park district, it could
It could be a
By an
private
HOA.
HOA amenity, yeah.
Right.
Just gonna write that down.
Yep,
Yep.
good.
Well, you've worked your way through the hardest part of this. Any other questions on this one? Comments? The rest of the topics that we wanted to talk to you about are not specific to areas, but they're village-wide policies that relate to pretty standard comprehensive plan themes that are obviously specific to Lake Bluff. So the first one that we have up here is to talk about environment and open space, and these are the primary recommendations that are in the plan. Just a word of context about this chapter. There's a lot in here. There's a lot of ideas that are in here. And I would tell you, when we first started working on the plan, even before we started working on the plan, we thought, what can a plan really help Lake Bluff do? It's got so much going, and part of the idea was to talk about sustainability and green and open space and how to make more of that. And so that's why there's a lot here. But this is also done in the context of understanding that the village has a sustainability plan. right? That the village has already got a tree strategy and a stormwater master plan. So this is not completely out of context with that, and it doesn't seek to replace any of that. These kinds of things that are here are additive. At some level, it's the idea that we had here was that the plan is planting seeds for things that might be tried at some point, that the ones that on an annual basis as the village budgets might be appropriate to consider being additive to the sustainability plan or other kinds of things. It is not an effort to create a department of open space and recreation in the village and have to do all these things. But in some ways, the ideas that are in the plan are newer to planning. A comprehensive plan that we started doing when I started doing this several years ago. We really didn't even talk about sustainability, right? And now it's got a different place in the world in which we live. And so that's the idea here, is to introduce some of those ideas and to highlight them as valuable assets of the village. And that's kind of what's on here. Again, it doesn't make anybody do anything. It doesn't change anything that's going on. It plants some seeds, which I guess is beating a metaphor to death about open space. But that's kind of the idea here. So again, I'm just reacting to the fact that when I do these discussions with plans, there's often this sense of, oh, so we have to do all this stuff? No. Sometimes I describe us as the waiters, and this is the menu. Right? And you can see what looks good this year, or what's appropriate, or where there's grant money available, better yet. And so that's where a lot of this comes from. I just wanted to share that context before asking if you had any thoughts about the primary recommendations, or there's a few of the more specific ones that we thought were a little more, I don't know, let's call them aggressive, that are on the next slide that we wanted to discuss. So with that, I would just ask if there are thoughts or comments in regard to this chapter.
My only thought about the whole open space thing is we do have some specific comments about the Park District working with them to improve habitat, but how about just a general statement being supportive and working with the Park District, period? Because the Park District is all about open space. And we should be striving for these two organizations to get along.
Sure.
And I'd also like to see just sort of, encourage public-private partnerships, and maybe even legacy kind of things. We're all encouraged to give to our college where we spent 4 years, and, we've lived in these communities for endless years, and why not leave the legacy to the village? Create.
I like that.
How about just another car dealership?
You can either put
That'd
us
be
in
more
your will
effective.
or open a car dealership. Pick. Sorry. Let's go to the next slide. There were a couple things here that, like I said, we're a little on the specific side that we thought were really interesting and that are being done in some places, but maybe they're not quite the bleeding edge, but maybe they're cutting edge. The first was to ask about level of comfort about what I just described, the way that the plan invokes environment and open space as this teaser at the level of detail that it's in there. The other was about looking to start advancing ideas about charging stations in public lots and make that a specific effort. That's something that is seeing more traction throughout the country. And then the other one that was in there that we thought, this one's interesting, there is movement afoot. The next thing is about all electric buildings, because natural gas that powers most of our stoves and so on and so forth also has environmental impacts. So these were the couple of things we thought were kind of the furthest out there and wanted to get your comfort with them before we put them in a plan. Again, it doesn't make anybody do anything. It says, think about this.
I had a question about that last point. Would that be residential buildings or commercial buildings?
Yes.
Or both? All buildings?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And it would ultimately be a building code amendment.
Yeah. And I think retrofitting was in there somewhere as well, right? Yeah.
All right, so nobody's freaked out by these ideas being just in the plan as something to think about.
What do you think, Drew, about putting charging stations in the parking lots?
So the village has avoided doing that early, and one, because we didn't know where to invest in putting public dollars toward that. That was kind of a risk. And the private sector has stepped in, for example, like Target's gonna get some, and that's being done with private dollars. It's one of those where, people who own electric vehicles have shared with me that just the way they live, that their expectation is that they're gonna take their car out and about, and then they're gonna charge it overnight at their private residence, and that has been generally how they've been used. And so the idea of needing to have chargers in every possible stall is not necessary, just because that's how people have lived with those vehicles.
I agree.
We have had other communities that we represent that have debated this, and one of the things they've run into practically is the cost of electrifying, depending on where electricity currently is located and running it to various spots, it can be quite expensive. But there's also another, one of our communities has been debating it in a slightly different way, not putting EV chargers everywhere, but reserving parking spaces in lots for electric cars. So to incentivize people to have electric cars. And so even if it's not a spot with a plug, you reserve spots, near the exit of the parking lot, or, where would be a good place to say, only the electric cars with the electric license plates can park here. So,
Without a charge.
And so the village right now has
Without a
done,
charge.
without the charger, but just as an incentive to say, if you come and park in our public lots, we favor electric vehicles. So there's ways you can look at EV driving. Incentivizing it. That's not necessarily as far as saying all lots should be electrified or all spots or whatnot.
So you put hybrids next to those?
that's right, there's a priority, that's right.
ADA, electric, hybrid.
I think
Bicycles first.
I don't.
But,
Cars.
so the village has done some of that in terms of like your vehicle sticker, lower pricing for that. We've reduced permit fees, like if you're gonna bring in a 2.5 amp service to your garage that may be detached, there's reduced fees for that. So the village has done some of that, but we haven't gone as far as that's all.
I would suggest to you too, that these aren't the prime spots that people are using. You could put them on the street, and so those would be prime spots. I don't know that you necessarily want to do that from an aesthetic standpoint, but part of this is really just to show leadership and to say to businesses, hey, you should be doing this too. Look, the village is doing it. So that might be the benefit of it.
But you're right, a lot of people, they just drive to here, it's not that many miles from their house, so we're not getting people from.
Right, I don't need to charge my car when I'm having dinner downtown, right?
Right.
So, I don't know that it meets a burning need so much as it advances a cause.
It's something, if we did decide to put up a couple signs and say this is reserved for electric vehicles without the charger, then that's a passive way to see what the need is, I guess, or not, that isn't telling need, that's
We have
the only
been
correlation.
looking at how many stickers are for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Right, now, not everybody gets a sticker, but generally speaking, it's a good tell. I mean, I think it's still like around, I think less than 10% of the vehicles on the road are still, it's growing, and it's gonna continue to grow, just won't be at the pace everybody thought, or,
Yeah.
we're.
I mean, I think ultimately having a couple of chargers might make some sense because not everybody driving into town is driving from the neighborhood, right?
Yeah, and I think this can be as simple as consider doing that.
I was gonna say, look for opportunities
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Public-private partnerships.
There you go.
Right.
Excellent.
Michael, with respect to bullet point number 3, I wonder if we could add a little caveat there, if aesthetically appropriate or whatever, because, a decade or so ago, a lot of the solar panels were rather unattractive,
Oh,
at least
yeah.
from my perspective. And obviously it's changed over the years, and you can't even see on some of the roofs now.
Yeah.
So I think it just has to fit into the neighborhood or CBD. I know we have some down in the Keegan Road area. You don't see them because they're behind the parapet or whatever, but.
And that's an interesting point. I mean, this idea wasn't necessarily about being self-contained solar with the panels, but the point about the panels is a good one, so I think we should add that.
Keep rocking.
Yes,
Just
sir.
back to the electric charging stations, just a note in the actual draft plan, we say they should be consider deploying them in Blair Park, the elementary school, and the middle school, but we conveniently left out any village lot or the train station. So I thought, if we're going to have this list and keep it in the plan, we ought to at least have the train station
Yeah.
Okay, like that, thank you.
or the village, the one lot else. I mean, we should put ourselves in the list.
Or
Be on the
design
list.
Public lots.
Public lots.
Force others.
Yeah.
Just so we're setting a good example.
There's an idea.
The next chapter that we wanted to cover is on the next slide, talks about housing. This section fills in a little bit of the types of housing for R5, which we've already talked about and had a real consensus about. This section, and again, I'm summarizing all these points that are in here and everything that's in the document, really does emphasize some of these missing middle ideas and ideas of housing diversity, which we've been talking about for a really long time. The one more specific question that's really interesting is the idea of the heritage lots in the community, and these are the original, and they're undersized by zoning. But these are opportunities to perhaps grandfather these in so that the cottage homes that were part of the community at its outset, that were part of these lots, could really come back or stay. So right now, you'd essentially have to put two of them together to be able to use them. But the question is, are we open to grandfathering them in so that they could be built on again without having to be re-subdivided and messed with? And
Yeah.
I know you had a couple of examples of that.
Well, before I even, if you ask staff today, of all of the recommendations in this plan, this slide would be the highest priority items. And like if that, based off the conversations that we've had to date, like if you were, like I go back to the 1997 plan, said that the village should immediately study the downtown and consider doing a moratorium. I mean, that was explicit language in the 97 plan, and the village did that. So in my mind, based off what I've heard over the last 24 months or so, these are the issues, with the exception of the heritage lots, and that's why we call that out, but like checking out the R5 zoning, going back to the ADU regs, you know, those are things that have been critical to getting to this diversification of housing, and to me, those are the big ones. But so this was the one that we talked about that has come up a little bit here and there over time, but really hasn't been brought out, and how to manage these heritage lots. And again, you guys know what I'm talking about, like the original cottage lots that when they become under ownership of an adjoining property owner, then they no longer become buildable anymore, right? They create a new bigger zoning lot, and that's what most codes do to try to generate conformity and compliance with the minimum lot sizes, whatever they are in the community. So it's not uncommon what we have on the books, but we've talked about that one of the things that really differentiates Lake Bluff is really the historical areas, the east side that has these lots that when you go down the streetscape, it's just really interesting, and it does also help facilitate the objective of having diversified housing. It's smaller housing, you know. So that's one of the things that we thought that we just want to make sure we have a conversation about.
Do you know about how many there are?
Great question.
8.
Not too many.
About 8.
Yeah.
When we did the initial review on that, there's very few left, and they're mostly on Prospect.
Well, there's probably,
Opening, going back and saying some of these that maybe weren't ever built on, or is there fair game to reopen and say this may be buildable, going through a certain process?
there's probably others other than the existing cottages, but.
Oh, that's a completely different question.
Right.
Well, I'm just saying.
We need another meeting for that.
But
You're
you
talking-
have to decide it tonight, but as part of exploring the topic, that's when you would do it. And that's what this says, is
Okay.
looking at reevaluating zoning to allow for, or study the possibility of preserving or resurrecting some heritage lots. I mean, that's the language that you would want to look at and say, can we do this without impacting stormwater to a great degree or changing intensity of uses? Maybe there's some outliers out there that could be redone. It's kind of a.
I think it's as much a community character question as it is
Yeah.
even a housing
Yeah.
issue. And the thing that struck us about it is it's about returning the community, or it's about acknowledging the community's roots, which is why we thought it was pretty cool.
There's no negatives to putting this in there. I mean, it's only positive.
No, I don't think to say studying the question, no.
Right, this does not say, as of tomorrow, thou shalt be. Right, that's a good point.
I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to put that in there.
Okay.
Now, when you say resurrecting, are you talking about then subdividing a bigger, if you took a house down?
There have been some properties that have been acquired that I'm struggling now, but may have never done anything other than bought the adjoining property and moved their fence around it, right? They never did anything with it, but it was buildable at one point, and now it's not. So is that one okay? I don't know, but that's the conversation.
Well, that's more than 8. I thought he was,
Yeah, yeah.
the original research we did was
Yeah.
where there are existing homes.
Yeah.
And we didn't want them to go away.
Yeah.
But those 25-foot underlying lots are
Plentiful.
all over the
Yeah.
Camp Meeting Association historic grounds.
But some may have never been developed, and maybe some are more closer to infrastructure to support. You know, maybe there's stormwater there or sewers that are maybe have more capacity. There may be reasons that these, you could examine that and say, these make sense, these don't, and you have an argument that's rational, so when you tell people this one is, but this one isn't, people say, I understand.
Well,
Because you're creating value, right? That's like,
Oh, yeah, you're creating value.
to Drew's point, the
I can-
idea of studying it and evaluating
Yeah,
it
there's
is-
nothing wrong with studying it.
Right.
Well, but the value of that is you're not studying the one or the other. You're not studying keep these lots or don't. There may be a middle ground. It might be a lot and a half that becomes the answer, right? So that's the benefit of studying it.
I think
Well,
that's
you're-
great.
In another way of saying it, you're recommending that we go from 7,500 square foot minimum lot size to 2,500 square foot minimum lot size. In terms of
With an
really
intent-
putting the math to it.
To study it
It's-
with the intent
it-
of it being in a very specific location for a very
It can
specific
get, it can get
purpose.
very, very, very dangerous very quickly, as I told you when I exploded on the Opticos recommendation when the home down at the end of Gurney and Center, if everybody knows the beautiful little historic cottage right at the southwest corner of Gurney and Center. There's a little home there that a couple took great care of. And the Opticos math allowed 6 units on that little lot, instead of the one adorable home that's there. And that's what you can get into when you start talking about allowing construction on 25-foot lots. And the Opticos math was 40-foot wide. So you're really, you gotta be really careful with saying, let's allow 25.
We're just gonna study it, George.
Okay, so the idea of studying this is something though that we're open for.
Sure.
No shoulds.
We've got extra time.
No shoulds.
When this-
There's lots of shoulds I have marked in this plan here that need to come out. They could instead of shoulds.
Well, but the idea of should studying is different than should change. And we try to be intentional on those, and if there are some shoulds in there you think are inappropriate, let's talk about those at a later date. I absolutely agree. Okay, let's,
Michael, the fourth bullet point,
Yes, sir.
from my perspective, a little too aggressive perhaps.
okay.
I still have trouble getting my head around ADUs. You know, from my perspective, in the right part of town with the right lot, totally appropriate. But I think it's a very, very slippery slope when we're dealing with the smaller lots. And I think we have to still critically evaluate that, you know, going forward. So like, my thought was continue to evaluate the potential ramifications of ADU construction or something like that. But this is a very bold statement.
Is that, are others comfortable with that?
Well, I think I was on the board when we first allowed for ADUs, and the thought process was that we wanted to be very restrictive in the front end, and so we put in a lot of, I would say, red tape, just because we didn't want it to explode. And with the anticipation that people would do it, we'd see how it worked, and then if it was something that we liked and encouraged, then we would potentially pull some of those barriers away. Problem is, we haven't had anybody do it, so we don't know if it works for us yet.
Have we really created any red tape? I thought we had very specific math. The math works, and there are many lots over in the West Terrace, particularly west of Green Bay Road, where there are larger lots where a lot of homes could easily, from a math perspective, put the ADU in the backyard, but nobody wants it in their backyard, but for the most part. Maybe an absentee landlord that wants to get 2 rents instead of 1, that's probably oh no, we don't allow that because of the land, you have to live in the home in front. But yeah, people aren't coming in the door saying, I want to do an ADU in my backyard, and staff looks at it and says, no, it won't work. They're just not asking, right?
One of the major barriers
That this board has already talked about.
Yeah, that we've discussed is that there's language in our code that I believe it's like the single housekeeping unit is the wording. So it basically makes it so that you cannot rent out the ADU to someone outside of family.
And that was a deliberate decision by the majority of the board.
I don't know that that's true,
we
because I think the
reconsider-
conversation that this group had after that, because somebody brought that issue up, and they said, oh, we didn't intend that to be that way.
And when we looked back at the minutes, it seemed to be, it was the intent, but maybe attitudes have changed about that, and so that's
Yeah.
part of where this, maybe this is also a study,
I think
something along those
the
lines.
concern
wording-wise.
was them turning into short-term rentals. At least that was my concern
That
when we
was-
put that
yeah,
language in.
and we had language
was-
in there about
is that we did not want the ADU to be an Airbnb.
And just anecdotally with that, we do get calls about ADUs, and it seems to be that's the point at which the questions stop is can it be rented out beyond family? And it's a significant investment, and, if it's for your parent who eventually will move on to another living situation, then it becomes.
Do you have another opinion on that?
I'm open-ended on this. I'm open-ended.
Well, I think that's what we're encouraging. We're encouraging it to be either a resource for, a family member, a parent, or a college, after college coming home and living at the space. At least in the conversation, that seemed to be the goal, and not to have it be an additional opportunity for another family to live on the same lot.
Those are all short-term projects, because eventually those people move out or pass.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I get it. But maybe that has to be readdressed at some point. and thought about.
So maybe instead of continue to identify, maybe evaluate barriers to ADU construction.
I think that's fair.
I'm-
I wrote study, but I'll go with evaluate.
I noticed that the state of Colorado has just passed a law requiring that population centers that are over a certain amount of people or close to transportation have required that the barriers to ADU construction be simplified or lowered, because they're really pushing for ADUs, because the housing shortages are such that ADUs are necessary. I spend time working in an area where many, many, many people have ADUs in their yards. Quiet neighborhood. It's single people or couples who seem to be living there of all ages. It's been really interesting to observe. So I think keeping an open mind, we may not be that space where that's a requirement for us, but keeping an open mind is also fair. And if it's somebody who is, young, getting themselves established, and they work in one of the pharmaceutical companies or nearby in Lake County, a lot of people would like to live here, and the barriers to entry are very challenging. So maybe we should consider.
And I think from the tone of the plan, that's an appropriate way to look at it, if that's the consensus of the group. I would tell you, I don't know about your clients, Ben, there is not a rash of ADUs popping up. I think, I always have the picture in my mind of the way teardowns were huge in the 80s and 90s, and everybody was trying to deal with it. We've not seen the ADUs flourish like weeds yet. So they are in California for sure, where housing shortage is beyond critical, and the cost of land is beyond what it is around here, so.
No, what we've seen, I think, is there's a lot of communities haven't had the conversation about ADUs the way that you have.
Most people duck it.
So there are plenty who really haven't. I mean, they sit there with single-family housing, and it's one family, one lot, and one principal structure, and they haven't really gotten into it. I mean, the one community I know up and down the lake that does have a decent number of is Evanston, which has for decades. And I don't think there's no new policy there, but
They aggressively pursue it. I think they get 8 of them in the last, I don't know how many years. I mean, it's just not taken off.
yeah,
And I think that was also part of the conversation, is we didn't want to be the test case.
right.
That's a good point. Okay, I think we have consensus on the language. So, in the interest of keeping us going, and thank you all very much for your patience and your stamina for tonight's discussion. There's a couple more of these broad themes chapters. The next one that's here is about community character. There's a couple of things in the community character chapter. One of them is about downtown, and it looks to emphasize the things that downtown is already about and reinforce much of what you're doing. I mentioned a couple of these. I like this graphic because it talks to the alley activation and some of the opportunities for some of the blow it up. Some of the opportunities for doing things that relate to streetscape, and that if there's going to be development, that it participate in the streetscape and that sort of thing. So these are consistent with what you've been doing over time. So I think the stuff in the CBD is pretty much consistent with what you've done. Same with the historic preservation elements that are in here. I'll tell you the thing that I really like about this chapter is the idea about branding and identity and whatnot. And a lot of plans talk about, well, we need new signs, we need new this, we need to identify who we are and put up signs and gateways and whatnot. And what we talked about, Drew's idea, and we talked about this with staff, is that, no, it's the identity of the village of Lake Bluff and how you portray that is not about a bunch of signs that clutter up the open space that is Lake Bluff to tell you we're a town of open space and nice areas. It's to leave things minimalist. Right? And that's the idea that's conveyed in the plan. And I thought that's a very elegant way of describing, frankly, who the village is and the way the plan can do it. So no big signs, no big balloons, no big changes to identity and whatnot, which frankly a lot of plans do. And thanks to Drew and staff for helping us flesh that out. I think that's a really good point. That's one of my favorite parts of this chapter, certainly, and frankly, much of the plan. So. If there's any thoughts about that, we didn't have a policy question in here or a detailed discussion question, but if there are thoughts or ideas related to this chapter, would love to hear them.
Well, in the regard to signs, I know there's verbiage in the back and in the details about banners in the industrial park down all the streets. I'm not in favor of that. I don't think.
So contrary to what I just said, talking about identifying the industrial park. Well,
and we took them out of our downtown because they were too hard to maintain, and I mean, they go ragged real quick. It's
a different economic development purpose, but I hear your points.
And the same, and then another detail in the orange block there, there's specific statements in the back about the alley right behind here about, let's turn it into a brick paver alley. I have no objection to having language in there about explore alternative uses for the alley as things change, but to make a specific recommendation to put bricks down the whole alley because that'll encourage people to walk down it, I don't know why we would want to say that. If you add up every one of these recommendations and every one of these studies, it's where we're going to need 100 car dealerships to pay for it all, but But I don't know, that statement.
Or a
I-
legacy,
I had
when you're on your way out.
Yeah. That statement about just bricking the alley, I mean, it was almost a standalone statement to
So
invite
it's not
people
be
to
so
walk
specific
down it.
about brick, right?
No, it's expenses. There's the reality we have to deal with. And every one of these studies that we want to do and handbooks that we recommend, they all add up. Man, it's $10 million worth of study work for Tesca alone, if you add all these recommendations in the 30-page list in the back of the book.
Proposals, if that's what you're saying.
No, I digress, but
That's not
as
why
an
that's in
example,
there.
you asked about that graphic, and it brought to mind the specific recommendation about the bricks. And it was literally a standalone
Defense of the
statement.
bricks, I don't remember where that came from, but in terms of who or what, but I know the what is actually the alley, right? It's brick, and the idea of visually continuing that type, it's very specific, and the village didn't pay for any of that, but, so, that's all.
Oh, yeah, this is,
Yeah.
they did that themselves, and it's a space that's used, but we're talking in the
I
plan about
understand.
this long alley this way.
Understood, yeah.
Which backs on the parking, it's
It should be
back
a
end
putting
of
green and
every-
bocce court anyway, right?
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah.
I like that.
2 bowling
And the
lanes.
plan can offer alternatives. I mean, there's stamped concrete,
Yeah.
there's lots of different ways. The idea is just to designate it as a pedestrian area.
Point taken.
Okay, if there's no other thoughts about this chapter, just a couple left. The next one talks about transportation. And again, a couple of the ideas that are in the transportation chapter are about advocating roadway improvements, but not looking to expand or widen roadways, right? And we talked about 176, I guess, is probably the best example there. So this idea of no widening comes through here. Other than the one that's questioned at the bottom, but in general, the idea was to not do that. So if there are any thoughts on this policy question at the bottom about being open to widening 176, although, as we've talked about, it's probably not in the cards, but further out between 41 and Green Bay Road, it's something to think about. If there's thoughts on that or the transportation chapter in general, would love to hear your thinking.
My thinking is that without doing something with the railroad tracks, then there'll be cars sitting next to each other instead of
They're just
behind
waiting.
one another. It's not going to improve traffic flow if the train tracks are there with the freight trains ever increasing. And it's single lane at the east end of the stretch. Everything goes to single lane at.
And I
Why
would
spend all
agree
that-
in the short term, but if we're talking about a 20-year plan.
Oh, if it's done in conjunction with other improvements.
I think we should be open to it, particularly if there are that much increase in freight traffic, perhaps there will be an overpass or some other, interchange to
Separation of
improve
modes
it.
of transit.
Yeah, so I think we should be open to the idea of widening. It just has to be in conjunction with other improvements.
Agreed.
Agree.
Great.
Yeah, I have a little more trepidation, of course, but,
Well, I think, but I think
In
the
conjunction with other improvements is the key.
But I think the caveats that you've heard here are an appropriate way for a plan to couch it.
yeah, as long as you use the right verbiage, Michael, that's the key, because, the lawyers are gonna look at the words and proceed, appropriately, or however.
I hear you, understood. The last theme chapter that we have in the plan is about economic development. In the existing conditions report and the whole assessment that was part of the plan focused on this notion that economic development in town happens in these primarily the three districts, right? There's the downtown, there's the area up 176 by 41 in Waukegan that are just such completely different business areas that their differences are clear, and that's where economic development happens, there in the business park. And so this section recognizes that. That's where the idea is about modernizing and keeping the attractiveness of the business park up so that people will invest in their own properties and people will attract tenants and people will charge more rent for their tenants and be able to let them keep cleaning up. The other thing that's part of this economic development chapter is really about partnerships. And if you read through the section, you'll see the word partner, partner, partner over and over again. And the reason is that's really how economic development happens. It's about partnering. It's about the opportunity to help spend other people's money and sharing the cost of things. One of the things that came out of discussions that we had with staff about how economic development's been done in the past was this idea of the Business Advisory Committee. And is that a group that, it's kind of dormant at best? Is it something that maybe has a role? And I'm influenced by the fact that I used to do economic development in a town that I worked in, and I talked to a lot of folks that are economic development directors. And we've all got stories about walking into some business who was kind of thinking about leaving town, and the village showed up and wanted to chat and whatnot, and they're like, oh, I didn't, and so I think there's value to doing things like reaching out. Now, who does that, right? Is it a staff position? No, I think staff's got enough to do, quite honestly. But is there a group of advisors or this advisory committee or folks who could do this on behalf of the village? That's something that we thought it was worth the plan looking to consider, and that's why it's in here. The other thing that's in here is to take these ideas and kind of prioritize them into a plan. Again, not for the sense of a plan telling you to do another plan, but to evaluate it, and this would be something we'd suggest you do at a staff level, of all these economic development things that are out there, let's pick a few to start with, and that's the idea of the plan that's in there.
And just context again, the village has a business retention and attraction program. It's somewhat informal, but we've done it in-house. We've hired consultants to do it depending on the issues. It's like going back to the business park, the Waukegan Road Corridor Study. The village had specific questions that, working with a consultant, they said, we don't want you to come with us. We want, staff, or they said, we want to go out there and meet with them. People are going to speak more freely. And I think that was true. And there's times when we've met with people and, we've heard candid feedback, but I think there's benefits of doing it both ways, but just throw that out there. The Business Advisory Committee is set up to be that conduit for the village, to have that standing meetings, and a lot of their work was related to a lot of the stuff that's happening exactly right now at this level. And so that's why that's been somewhat dormant of late, is that their body of work is actually being talked about tonight in a lot of ways. And it's been worked through with some of the things that have already happened in Block 3. So there'll be more work to do, but for now, that's just a better explanation of that. And that group was set up to be that conduit. The village has had different iterations of that. There was a downtown and economic development committee at one point. So it just transitions and evolves over time, but that's kind of been the many faces of economic development.
And the one at the bottom too looks a little weird too, this idea of sub-regional tourism. That's another partnership thing, right? Is so that when people come for the weekend, what do they do? If you come for somebody's wedding, what do you do over the weekend? And for a while, I think they're still doing it. Ravinia and the Botanic Garden and a couple of organizations were marketing together, like, hey, are you in town? Come here. And then it's cheaper to go to all three of them and that sort of thing. And, the idea of maybe incorporating downtown into somebody else's, hey, if you're going to go here, come here too. That's what that one's about. So, but if there's any thoughts or questions about that, we'd certainly welcome a chance to discuss them.
Well, and I think we've got a lot of targets that we can, cycling is one thing that people already come here for. Historic preservation, as that's gotten off the ground. Foodies, the restaurants here and stuff. So I think going after the groups that are already, the interests are already there, and we're the connection, so how do we market those? Hanging fruit a little easier, kind of.
I like that. Thank you. I'll mention those.
Michael, just one minor comment. When we have pictures with, individuals, obviously, should we blur them in this day and age, or should it be as clear as it is? I mean,
we take all the pictures in the public way, so it's generally not an issue. If it's something that the village isn't comfortable with or that's an issue, we can certainly do that.
I mean,
It's a great question, but like I said, when there are pictures in the public way or when people are coming to public events, it's not something that we've ever had an issue with. But.
Okay.
Yeah, no expectation of privacy.
Right.
No, That's absolutely true.
We have a few where we walked up to people's windows and took a picture of them eating dinner, but we didn't include those.
How close were you? Were the lights on? Was it dark
I
outside?
really am not allowed to comment on that. So that's the substance of it. In terms of next steps on the next slide, we'll revise the draft that you have based on your comments. We'll post it on the website and look for people to start reading this. And the next step will be to have an open house. You may recall the one that we had earlier in the process. We'll do that same thing. There may be some revisions to the plan that come from the open house. We'll update the village board on what the plan is up to, kind of something like this, but more of a presentation. Glad to workshop with them as much as they want, but typically the village board is a presentation and an update, and then we'll come back to you for a public hearing.
What's your time frame?
We'll have to talk with staff about how long we should leave it out for people to get notice of. I would tell you the village has been just outstanding about leaving the note about, hey, the comprehensive plan is out there, come check out the website and whatnot. So the word it continues to get out there, so I don't know that this needs to take a really long time. But I would think we could do, the open house certainly in the next 30 days or so. But we'll talk with y'all about that.
We've been talking, I think the original plan was to have a conversation to get the nitty-gritty plan and start the public hearing, open the public hearing next month on this, and I don't think there's any reason to not do that. Because there's gonna be, well, I think it's just gonna, it gives people reason to come.
Yeah.
They can see you guys work and finalize the document and work through that, and I think that's helpful because most people in the community don't know how this works. And I think that's like a classroom that I think is helpful to the community to see what's happening and what finer points you're talking about. And I think that's exactly a great point to engage the public and then get to the final, but having multiple public or continuing the public hearing for 90 days or 60 days, whatever it takes, I think that's ideal because you have the conversation, you show them what you're talking about, and then you conclude it, and it's, to me, that's a home run in terms of engagement, in terms of opportunity and expectations, and I think to me, that's the best way to do it. And don't be afraid to say we have minor tweaks and understanding that, and people understand how this conversation's evolved. I think that's the best way to do it, personally.
Statutory requirement about adopting within a certain amount of time of a public hearing?
That's when the recommendation comes out. I think it's 90 days from
So
when.
it's not opening the public hearing,
No.
it's making the
After following
recommendation.
It's after the recommendation. So, yeah.
So I like that idea of opening the public hearing with the group, and then letting people take a look at it. Yeah, that's cool. Did we talk about that and I forgot?
I did, we
My
did.
bad.
That's all right.
I like it. I still like it. Anyway, thank you all very much for your.
Please don't
sharing
shut
your
down
insights
yet.
and your
I
ideas.
get a couple of questions about the 160 pages that follow these 17 pages. And I know we don't want to dive into every one, but there are a couple items, like there's a very specific recommendation in there about considering allowing parking along the shoulders of Sheridan Road, creating parking spaces. To me, it's completely opposite of what we talk about with what we want to do with our parkways and green space to, if we overbuild the train lot, let's consider page 56. And then another one, that one, and then the specific recommendation about creating public restrooms along the bicycle trails. Building, we have 2 bathrooms in the train station. One of them's in horrible conditions, hasn't been, and the other one, we lock the train station up a lot when I don't think we should. I think to consider building, I just think that's a slam dunk, get it out of the plan. Building public restrooms along the bicycle trails, and maintaining those structures, the cost of the sewer and water.
Yeah, and
Anyway, I don't know how everybody else feels about those 2 particular items, but those were those 2 really, I have about 40 notes I'm going to pass along. Most of them are just structural, there's errors,
Okay.
But those 2 recommendations.
And I
Yeah.
would suggest to you, George, something that specific probably is a little bit of an overreach for a plan that, providing concepts of how to have trails and whatnot is certainly good, but if there are things that are that specific that are concerning to you and the group, I agree with those can be scrubbed.
Well, I want to know if the group, because see, we're not going to have a group discussion anymore.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you
No,
bringing
you
it up
will.
now.
I mean, the public, you can have that as part of the public hearing. Doesn't mean you can't have those conversations. And that's my point. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that. You should have these continued conversations during the public hearing. It doesn't have to be perfected yet.
Well, let's knock two of them out right away. What do you?
No, so I think-
What do you
so to
think
that
people think
point,
about
let's talk
allowing
about the restrooms
building
first.
parking spaces along Sheridan Road?
I would agree we should not do that.
No, not.
All right, that's easy. The second one, the specificity around the restrooms issue is, we are exploring ways to, I'll say, harden the restrooms at the public safety building and change maybe that vestibule so that people can have access to those, so that within, earshot of the trail, there's accessible things that are open and maybe observed, 24/7 to give people that alternative, right? And so that's the kind of stuff, and that's better than that, right? Because it's already built, yeah. So we'll change that.
I would rather see it at the parks than along the bike trail, frankly. I mean, I know Artesian has the warming hut, but oftentimes it's not. Yeah, oftentimes. So if we were to
That's
go.
even closer, yeah.
If we were to go in that direction, I would argue for the public bathrooms, public restrooms in those areas.
So we're
Right,
acknowledging
structures.
that there's a need. And let's try to find a solution that is reasonable.
Efficient, yes.
Yeah.
Got it? Okay.
I have a more practical question. Are we going to be handed another batch of these, or do we save these and just?
I think if you have comments that you've already evaluated, those probably, nothing tonight changed high-level existing or future land uses that I heard tonight. There was no direction changes on that. So if you had specific comments or questions, we can certainly try to cover those tonight or at the next
What I'm
meeting.
saying is are we going to get another?
You're not going to get there, that won't change. It shouldn't change unless you have some heartburn with something.
Okay, fine, then I'll say
Other
that.
than mistake, I'm assuming you're still going to go
The
through and
plan itself, I think, is what he's asking about,
the
like the
mistake, like there's a
full-
statement that the house on Prospect is a Frank Lloyd Wright designed house, and it's not. They discovered sometime.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, if there are
True,
corrections
and-
and so on, please
Yeah,
pass
yeah.
those along. We'll fix
I don't even
them.
remember
And
reading that.
The land use up at Crabtree is still a mess on the bigger maps. You can't, someone created a smaller map that actually comes very close to the truth, but it hasn't been moved to the newer, bigger maps. So, there's lots of things that that
Yeah.
are just wrong, that need to
Yeah.
get fixed.
Yep.
Little things, but
If you have those now, we'll take them.
I'm gonna type them up for you, because it's all handwritten notes.
Okay.
Okay.
And if not, what's the timeline?
So I think what we would do is, to the extent we can, we will prepare corrections so that we can go live with a working draft for the public hearing next month. And so we'll do our best to take, if you can, give them to us, we'll get them, we'll incorporate it in there, and we'll make a note that some sort of explanation to the readers that know that this is not perfected, this is, we're working through some final comments, but are eager to encourage greater public comment in it, and we're gonna open the public hearing and all that.
So maybe 2 weeks, Drew, for us to get any further comments to you?
Well, we need to post it 15 days in advance.
I don't think
You
so.
have to do notice for the public hearing, but I don't know that you need to
Post our documents any
post the
earlier than we
document.
would.
Right.
I don't think
So
there's
it's
a
just
requirement for
it's just the
posting, I don't think.
publication notice in the newspaper.
Yeah, so we're
15,
good.
15 days in advance.
Yeah. Everybody comfortable with that plan, that approach?
Yeah. So like by March 7th, or what's the cutoff
Just-
date?
If you want to pick March 7th, that's fine, I think that's fine.
Or whatever is
So we're
reasonable.
talking about March 19th for the open house, for the,
The
public hearing.
opening of the public hearing.
it even says it on my calendar. just
Yeah,
so I
nice.
was listening.
When we do the public hearing, we're going to go page to page?
No,
I hope not. I think, hopefully, we've gotten comments like these final corrections, and if you have, a lot of this direction should have this should have all been addressed.
what we'll do is, as I said, when we get to the public hearing, we'll take the recommendations, and that'll be the meat of our slides, the things that we're presenting publicly. Like we said, what you've got in front of you is for those who have been part of this process. and we'll do a brief presentation, and then you'll open it up for public comment, and then whatever comments and questions you all have.
But you would be encouraging, you would be letting, as part of the public notice, you'd be letting them know that the first draft is online and that they're, encourage people to look at it before you even have a public hearing, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we've been doing that for the work product, the entire steps. You know, every e-news says,
Yeah.
come check it out.
Can we push this up a week, just so that we, well,
I don't know if anybody has, I guess the answer, we would love to get comments as soon as you can provide them.
Right.
Okay.
And if there's some reason, I'd like, even like George, if you had
You can have
pages-
mine on Friday.
There,
if it's at
I
all
need to
possible,
type
He'll
them
have 'em by
up, that's
Friday.
all.
if it's at all possible to have them by the 28th, that would give us, a few days to get it revised and get it up so people can read it. So if that's 10 days, almost, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'll work out fine.
Okay, so
Just
we-
have it this
if you could have
weekend.
comments to the staff by the 28th on the maps and the text and whatnot, that'd be great. We'll be more than ready for March 19th.
Now, I'll tell you, there was one thing that, if we're close to being done, the only thing I would like to add is, one of the things that I was pleased with, and I would say pleasantly surprised, is that contrasting this plan substantively and visually with the current plan, wow, right? I mean, it is like in visually, that it is, we were shocked with some of the stuff. So Andrew and Michael, some of the content there, I mean, it is a beautiful plan visually. When you look at this, that was my takeaway, and maybe I'm just a planning nerd, but going through it, and like even these images, these are like really are telling about the community and what it's communicating about what's important to us, and beauty and family. And to me, it's like that is also telling the story. I told you a long time ago when we started this, I was involved with comp plans that were written on the other side of, this is not what we want to be, but this is not who we don't want to be. If you remember that, it's like, and it's like, this is on the opposite side. And this is like visually and just in all categories, I think is unbelievably improvements over the current plan in terms, and us, staff, mostly as users, thank you. So, I mean, I think it's good. So,
We like that so many of the pictures come from the village and come from residents.
from residents, right? Those images are from our own
They're from
community.
the
Yeah.
contest. We thought that was a really fun thing to be able to incorporate in here.
No, I think it's a tremendous document, still evolving, obviously, but very highly, very well done.
Well, Chris Martin did the last plan all by himself. at
Well,
his
and
desk
believe me,
downstairs,
yeah,
in Clara's
right.
office. One person. He
yeah.
did the whole thing.
Yeah, right. And here's the other thing too. I mean, and don't hurt yourselves patting yourselves on the back collectively, but some of these conversations that you've had about the housing and having Opticos come in, that's, if you saw, there was a letter from the NSBAR for the realtors, like, communities don't have those conversations because they're awkward, difficult, and highly, they can be, there's some friction sometimes, but you guys have had a lot of conversations. The strategic plan is called to have, and you guys have done the work, and I think it shows, and I think Lake Bluff will be better for it. So it's good, very good.
Congratulations.
Thank you for guiding us.
No, you've done a tremendous job, Michael, you and the team, and Drew and Claire and everybody else.
Maybe last question? This, what are we looking at here? Prioritization? Where does
Yeah,
that
the
fit?
table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
Oh, the
want feedback
implementation
on that?
table.
Implement, yes.
Absolutely,
Do you want some feedback on that too?
absolutely.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
One more question. I've got a lot of questions. But I was very intrigued by the estimated costs, the 30 pages of, where you've taken every recommendation, the whole plan, and tabulated it. And we put these dollar figures. I thought, as I started the table, the dollar figures were meant to be the cost to the village. But there are items that were clearly would be 100% borne by a developer, but yet it's listed as being $3 signs. In other words, very expensive to the village, and I didn't understand that whole concept of where we're going with those 3 different levels of cost. Isn't it supposed to be the cost to the village to implement these things? What is the, or am I wrong?
What, no, it's generally about the cost, because it's generally about how complex and how likely or unlikely is something to happen. If you think that's an interesting turn, we can turn it that way and revise the way the dollar signs are in there.
Well, I'm asking, what's the intention? You created the,
It's cost that will be borne by someone.
Right.
Right, so the idea,
The
sometimes
statement
it's
of the
public
likelihood
dollars,
of it
sometimes,
happening.
so it's, some
Okay.
things are much more expensive, but it doesn't say
okay,
who's
so
gonna
it's
bear
it's not the cost.
a reflection of the village's expense. But just because, that doesn't mean the village won't step up and do it either, you know what I mean? Like, it can be, and that's when we added the column about duration, because we said, it can be inexpensive, but take 50 years, right? And so we said, we need another indicator here, because that matters. You know, like if you're doing those consulting grids, the Boston Consulting Group, you know, easy to do, expensive, that kind of. So we wanted to have that other indices to reference that it may be inexpensive, but it could take 50 years. So let's acknowledge that up front, because expectation management, right? When we're out doing this and working the plan over the years, it's like, why are you guys tackling that? Well, there's a reason, so.
Very good. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you all.
Hopefully, we were as diplomatic as we could be on the sensitive issues, and but appreciate all your hard work.
I would echo what Drew said. You all have done a wonderful job of having difficult conversations that a lot of other communities just sidestep. So thank you for that.
No, thank you, Andrew.
Thanks.
Agenda item number 7, staff report.
Yeah, so included in the packet, and Drew referenced it, there was a letter received, let me grab that. Yeah, I don't know that I have it in my packet, but it was, oh, thank you, yeah, by the Illinois Realtors Group, and it is basically just, as Drew mentioned, supporting the missing middle discussions. And so we just wanted to share that with you guys, but other than that, I don't have any other updates.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, they were focused on the affordable housing conversation, and I had a conversation, and said, hey, just so you know, this is what we're talking about. We have an affordable housing plan, and we've acknowledged that, affordable housing is possible, but it's gonna be extremely difficult in Lake Bluff, but our missing middle is about typology more so than affordability, and they said, hey, all that matters too, so thank you for doing it.
So, and that leads to my question, is our missing middle housing, is it a component of the affordable housing strategy as written in the letter to us? Or are they two totally separate things?
If you take missing middle housing, I think it's defined generally to include affordable housing, because it increases affordability because there's more typology and, there's different products available. But that's, if you remember when Opticos consultant stood up here, she said that's not going to likely be the case here in Lake Bluff unless somebody subsidizes that in some shape or form because of the underlying land cost and so forth.
But they are aware that.
100%.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Commissioners report, agenda item number 8.
I asked you the question, but probably for the benefit of the whole group, the other part of Block 3 is, you did confirm that as far as you know, it is still alive?
Still alive. I think they're trying to figure out the path for how it might get developed and who is going to fill that role. And so I don't think it's deceased, but I think it's still being worked through.
It's not on life support.
There we go. Thank you. You're the pro. You're the pro.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with that.
It's just an assisted care.
All right. Item number 9, adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Hey.
Thanks for a very productive and robust
For the
discussion.
grandkids.
Wow, that was quick. Last call.
Yeah, you been there?
That big one